Let me just make sure that this is running and see how it's going. We are doing some preemptive testing. How does this sound? Just navigating the channels. This computer is not very good. Okay, let's turn this up just a... Well, let's see what it sounds like this. Hello, testing. Hello. God, that delay. Okay, let's turn this up just a... Well, let's see what it sounds like. Hello, testing. Hello. Okay, that sounds fine. I'm gonna close this out before it kills me. Alright, I'm going to be watching my stream on my phone as well, just to make sure that things are operating smoothly, because I am not very good at this. I should be kinder to myself, but I don't want to be. Alright. Hello everybody, welcome to day 2 of streaming the Summer League's auditions. I'm just going to go ahead and start over with mine. I'm going to finish it while people join in, see what's going on. I'll just go through the whole thing the first time, and then just keep it going. I'll probably be taking water breaks periodically for the sake of my own voice. But for now, it'll just be me reading the first story, and I hope you all enjoy. I already have a couple selected. There are some that I'm going to have preference for. I'm having preference for the written audition, since that is the period that I am currently at, or the league that I'm currently entered into. And I have some people that I'm hoping to preference if they're here tonight, but we'll be taking requests as we go along. Oh, and my cat is trying to sabotage the stream. My apologies. The trees were plentiful and looming within the confines of the sacred forest. The last rays of evening light cast long shadows that hid all but the blank eyes of thousands of corpses in various states of decay. Hello.
All good?
Yes, I'll be reading this first one by myself, if that's okay while people join in and we get things settled.
Oh, thank God, finally. Oh, thank God, finally, my college doesn't really do the voice chat here. My college internet doesn't work usually with voice work, but whatever.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to keep reading, so. They milled as one unit, quietly formed behind a figure so dark it was defined more by the light that it ate than the shadow he cast. His smoking dark hair hid the hands that were behind his back whilst he waited patiently, unbothered by the stench of rot in the air. She stood in defiance, a figure of power and fury, her hair done in the style of 9 snow-white tails, practically bristled with rage and indignation. To her sides were 2 rows of 20 guards each. They stood nervously at the back of the pagoda, clenching bladed spears that they aimed at the host of undead. She stood in front of her shrine with energy practically crackling like lightning around her black gold clothing. "Where is he?" It was a demand delivered from a voice like a bare knife. The figure, in mock surprise, held a hand to his chest. "Why, Madam God-Eater, do you mean to admit that you have lost someone in your own domain?" Her fingers clenched around an unlit pipe that she had been using to keep her focus. Do not play this game with me, Lord of Mourners. Her cross guards, each sturdy and experienced in their own right, backed away at the sound of her voice like it was the crack of a whip. Please, call me Baladeth. In a slow and theatrical fashion, he took a bow. The tufts of hair on the back of his head rose up in an oddly smoldering fashion. She would have stabbed him if she could. She knew she had to keep her cool, but if she was going to have to deal with someone insulting her in her own home, she was going to need something else to give. Sweet relief flooded her nostrils as, with the blink of an eye, she found herself in a realm where she could not smell the injustice upon her nose. Her temper quieted slightly as she could breathe again. Baladeth, I would like to know where your apprentice is. His face took an all too pleased expression as joy spread across the little white stars of his eyes. Oh, so you know about that. I always have. He's been busy in my home. It's just a shame that I haven't been able to find him since you've arrived. Her voice remained even as she kept her eyes upon this king of the dead. Why, I merely wanted to keep him a surprise, Madam God-Eater. We were just so excited to enter him into your tournament. And how did you envision him doing that exactly? Well, I figured he was simply going to attack you. Absolutely not. Fury boiled to the surface as her voice turned dangerously quiet. The world bent in a strange and undulating fashion around her hands as they slowly raised up. The pipe that sat between her fingers bent and spun and twisted in place as though it were held by a million different hands in a million different poses. Her eyes blazed into thousands of fractal shapes, sizes, and colors. She had become everything in a single moment. You are to take your apprentice and leave this instant. Do not even think of returning to my home, lest you suffer my wrath 1,000-fold. She sounded as 100,000 voices pointed as one. Her tone was not loud or boisterous. It was simply put as plain matter of fact. Her cross guards, all battle-hardened, fell backward at the display and moved closer to the safety of the pagoda. Only the most hardy of them kept their weapons in hand. Oh, very well. I suppose it is the end of the entry period anyway. Baladeth sighed. Then he turned his head to speak to someone behind the God-Eater. Nalagrom, come on. It's time to go home. She spun around. From behind her, a figure had emerged. Whoever it was, he had apparently walked through the back wall of her shrine. The stonework hissed and bubbled. Some of it even caught fire as it touched the ground. He sported a wild grin that dripped madness like honey off a razor blade. He had red eyes that shone brilliantly from beneath the shadow of a dark brown hood. They were focused purely upon her, disregarding her guards who were all on the ground, seemingly knocked unconscious by the sheer presence of this man. Their faces were twisted in disgust. Some clamped hands over their mouths, others simply held themselves in panic. God-Eater! He howled in a voice that was like a wind-torn sail in a hurricane. He flung his cloak to each side like a cape, the small fires around him growing to an inferno. Like a flame on a wick, he moved in quick and wild movements, dancing forwards across the stonework. He gave a spin, a skip, and a leap, in a wild dance that created a dozen small flames that exploded around him. With a thrust of his arms and a dramatic pose, they flew forwards. Each had changed into the shape of a skeletal fist that flew towards her face. Time slowed to a halt as her brows furrowed, the world shifting and changing whilst she saw this fight playing out through different eyes. This time, instead of leaping towards her, he had been spewing a fountain of fire from his mouth in a crazed roar. She shifted the world again. This time a pair of whips flew from his wrists to strike out like snakes. They even had decorative little fangs on them. Again she shifted. Now he was just straight up trying to punch her in the jaw with an explosion like an unsophisticated thug. Every world she went to that had him in it also had him taking an ill-fated swing towards her face. Every world she changed to, she could see the figure of Baladeth in the exact same pose, hands behind his back and waiting patiently for this to be done. She had to know more. With a deep breath, her awareness expanded. Time, space, it meant nothing as she searched. She could not find him, this Nalagrom, but she could find out about the things around him. So she did. Okay, gonna get a glass of water real quick and then keep going. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello. I have a glass of water. I'm going to take another sip and then keep going in about a minute or two. Ah,
Gotta maintain the pipes.
gotta maintain the pipes. You haven't missed anything, I can't read your name.
Cap.
Cap, yes. And T. I will call you T because I cannot read the rest of your name for some reason.
I mean, that's just my character. Well, no. I made my name Cap the Humble because I am the most humble person ever. No one is more humble than I. And, yeah, my character's Toffee.
Nice. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice. Nice to meet you, too.
Okay, Toast. Hello, Toast. Dog. Okay, I'm gonna get back to it. It was a meeting of the forces of evil in a dark Gothic-style room with little light, save for the torches sitting in sconces on the wall. A dark brown oak double door was the only means of entrance or exit. A white flame had been painted on the center to mark this place for what it was, a meeting room. A large circular table sat at the center, bearing a copper ring that wrapped itself around a few inches towards from the edge. Around this table were 5 figures looming in the darkness. They all seemed to be waiting for something, with nary a word passing between them. They had been here in the dark for hours, to the point where patience had long since lost its appeal, and the thought of bailing had well and fully sunk in. "When do you think he'll be here?" came the voice of a pirate captain, just as much lizard as man. He bounced about as though he had boundless energy. A figure, a human wearing a black hood and dark leather armor, turned his head to look at the reptilian. "When he finds it thematically appropriate. You should know he's a damn theater kid." "Come now, Karim, there's no need to be rude. Captain Hesk is just voicing our concerns." A deep, rumbling voice emerged from a giant of a man wearing all too loose-fitting clothing. He was probably the only one who seemed to have a smile on his scarred face. "The dead have also had many concerns for him to consider. He does operate on a scale that we do not understand." The fourth voice, a woman's, came from the form of a glowing blue hobgoblin ghost. She had been dressed in the tattered and broken remnants of armor, her body torn and battered from what appeared to be a final battle. The final, a delicate-looking blonde woman, stood dressed in the trappings of royalty. She wore a black leather band around her forehead with a red gem sewn to its center. She nodded knowingly. "We know Baladeth is constantly busy. It's something we've had to accept. I'm more concerned with the distinct lack of Nalagram." At her words, the others turned their heads to a very clear and very empty spot at their table. Karim crossed a pair of muscular arms that had been honed and trimmed from years of fighting. "Gotta admit, I'm curious about that too. I don't even see him outside of work anymore. Hell, I ain't even seen him on the job in some time either. I do believe Princess Lucinda here might have some more personal reasons for her concern," Hardrange said with a deep grin on his face. It wrinkled the scars that ran over his left eye. The blonde woman looked away with a deep blush on her face. "You know I'm here on business, Hardrange." "He'd just be teasing ye, lass. The big oaf not be having much going on in his poor little head," the captain chortled happily, much to the chagrin of the larger man. This brought a sigh from Karim and the ghostly woman, whom both stared nonplussed at the door as the conversation droned on. Thankfully, they did not have to wait for much longer. As their eyes rested upon the symbol of the white flame, the doors slammed open in a gust of wind and heat that snuffed each of the torches. Light that they had not been prepared for flooded into the room, blocked only by the pitch-black figure of the Lord of Mourners. He stepped in with hands in his pockets, doom trailing him like a cloak. As he did, ghosts slipped in around him, carrying papers, scrolls, and pens. Those that held nothing flew to the stumps of the snuffed torches to light them ablaze once more, this time with a light haunting blue color. The copper circle in the table saw 5 ghosts slip into it, then a ring of the same type of blue fire spread around it in a dramatic fashion. Despite being so close, no heat came from the fire. The room instead got colder for it. In the circle emerged a slightly raised map of the world. The borders of countries formed, the outlines of seas, the edges of continents. In this map, small points were raised up, strategic locations, the markers for fortresses, the positions of armies. In the flurry of activity, Baladeth stood at one of the last open spaces at the table. The door closed behind him, and he stood looking expectantly with those twin starred eyes. The King of the Hollow Crown had arrived. "Good afternoon, my generals. Shall we begin?" "You dramatic bastard!" Karam grunted agitatedly. His attention, along with the attention of the others, had focused on their master. There had been no face, but a smirk could be felt behind those eyes as he scanned the table. "You know what I'm about, though at this moment in time it's the least of our worries." His face turned to the rest of the guests in the meeting room. His expression turned deathly serious as the various ghosts continued their work around him. "Status reports. What is the state of the world since we last had this meeting?" Captain Hesk nodded, his long tail flicked eagerly as he stepped in, ready to give the first update. "It not be going well, Baladeth. The Isle of Nomads and the Sea Dwellers be ready to square up for another fight." "To follow on that, we're seeing more patrols at the borderlands, with better equipment and more training. They're getting closer and closer by the day," Hardrange continued. Karim nodded in response and turned to face the dark figure of his employer. "Been running the rumor mill, too. Local governments are getting braver. Some of them are even discounting the blight we've inflicted as happenstance or bad luck. They ain't too afraid of us no more." Baladeth gave a low at the commentary, letting each of his advisors who had come say their piece. That was when his eyes turned to the delicate-looking princess. His white stars matched her blue gems. "And what of the lands of Heraldria?" he asked. She gave a deep breath and let out a long sigh. "Duke Halrond is getting bolder. He's been forming an army in his own right and has been speaking of moving upon Arcantia. Most of his thugs are on board, of course, but they don't have the manpower to make a move this strategic yet." "And of internal affairs?" Baladeth tilted his head at the princess. "He hasn't tried anything so far, though he's beginning to discount the curse more and more." As she spoke, her eyes fell. The subject appeared to be rather disheartening for her. "Don't worry, princess. We'll keep you single and ready to mingle as long as we have to," Karim said dismissively. It seemed to bring a smile at the edges of her lips, though the air in the room was decidedly quiet. "So we seem to be in the back foot of this fight, then," Baladeth stated with a graven energy to him. Heartrange leaned on the table, his palms at the edges of the surface, just a few inches away from the haunting flames. "It would seem so, Baladeth. We don't have the force necessary to tackle everything happening here." "Hey, turns out being an enemy of the world is a hard ring to be fighting in," Hesk chimed in. Karim snorted as his arms uncrossed. "Who'd have thought, right? Either way, if the opposition gets their morale up, we'll be in some hot shit in a matter of months. We need a headliner, Baladeth." As he spoke, all eyes went to the empty space just to their boss's right. "I hate to admit it, but Karim's right. We haven't seen your apprentice in some time, Baladeth. Is Nalagram all right?" Heartrange, despite looking the most ragged and war-torn of the living here, seemed to have a genuine look of concern on his face. Baladeth nodded in response. There was little hesitation. "My apprentice is currently on a personal journey. We are working on a solution to the problem, though." "So we be on our own for the time being," Hesk declared. "Which ain't good. We got enemies knocking on our doorstep, no longer taking us seriously. We got power, but we ain't got presence, Baladeth. We need Nalagram to work the morale front." Karim planted his palms firmly on the table and stared at the dark figure with plain and forward intent. Lucinda nodded. "Karim is right. We need someone who can work a crowd. If we're going to prevent anything further from falling apart, we'll need a display to remind them of who we are." Baladeth let out a long and ragged sigh. "Perhaps you are right. I will find a solution to our Nalagram problem. But if word gets out that he's out of commission, that could exacerbate the issue. What word have we from the realms of the dead?" Attention focused on the ghostly general who, until this point, had been standing there silently. She picked her head up and looked around at the rest of the group.
"There may be a solution to several of our problems if we are willing to take a gamble,"
she stated with the cold, steady hand of the dead. "All these here, except for Hesk," Karim commented, wearing a wry grin as the reptilian gave him a sour look.
"We have found a realm in need of the hands of a necromancer. A visitation from the King of the Hollow Crown would benefit greatly. There is supposedly a tournament to be held there. A display of power and villainy might revive our reign of terror across the nations of the world.
Baladeth gave a solemn nod. Very well. What is this place, and what opposition are we to expect should I get my apprentice involved?
Those from that place call it the Crossroads. Opposition would be unable to handle the apprentice, save for their guardian deity. She is known as the God Eater, something you might be familiar with, Lord of Mourners.
There was a long pause from Baladeth as he stared at the ghost. Agitation flared on his face for a moment, but if there were any thoughts, it died before they formed. He gave a nod. I suppose I have been denying my responsibilities to the realm of the divine. What do you think the odds are of Nalagron being granted entry to this tournament?
That depends on him. The word from those that could speak in that realm is that she has grown bored, cocky, and perhaps complacent. They seem to have very little to do there. If he puts on a good show, the odds would be in his favor.
As the ghost spoke, the map on the table shifted to the appearance of a woman with pointed fox ears. From what they could see, she was radiant, beautiful even. Anything we should know about our unwilling host? Baladeth asked.
She is near omnipotent, much as you are. She wields dimensional magic and can pierce the veil of realms. It is very possible she could be watching us at this very moment. You would have your work cut out for you to hide his presence, Lord of Mourners.
Baladeth's face went from grave to rather pleased. His back straightened ever so slightly. Kavrim, based on our information, how long do you think we can keep up our charade for? Based on current trends, about 2 months. Baladeth gave a nod. Find me a path to this crossroads we can take. It is time we brought my apprentice back to the center stage. Okay, quick water break. Puppy. Okay. Nalagrom, you rat bastard, get your damned ass out here right now before I eat someone's firstborn. There was no subtlety, there was no eloquence, there was merely the righteous fury of an employer trying to get their employee to do their damn job. Nah. The reply through the plain wooden door was irreverent, dismissive, and sounded like someone had gargled marbles for breakfast that morning. It was a voice that sent Baladeth's long smoking hair to a near roaring cinder. The dark figure pinched the bridge of his nose as the twin little sparks furrowed into frustration. Is Nalagrom gonna be okay? Baladeth's head turned to peek at the hall behind him, to find that it had been crowded with the hordes of the dead. Some ghosts caught in the final moments of their life, skeletons, even a few zombies who were on the nearer end of fresh. All, for the most part, horribly mutilated. Yes, he'll be fine. He's just throwing a temper tantrum. Back to your duties, all of you. It's our day off, one of the zombies stated. He was missing his lips, so his accent was enhanced. The rest of the gaggle of undead nodded and muttered their agreement before turning their sunken eyes, similar to a collection of begging cats, at the unfortunate god of death. And you choose to spend it here? Baffled, Baladeth turned his attention away from the still-closed door before him to face his subjects. We heard you're going to the crossroads. Fred's got family there, one of the ghosts called, waving a hand excitedly. And we're worried about Nalagrom, another voice chimed from the rear. And bored, came another. We should start a riot. Okay, apparently this was happening now. Baladeth placed 2 hands together in silent prayer and took in a deep, non-existent breath for strength of mind. Fine, your point has been made, I hear you, and I am clearly attempting to resolve the issue at hand. Now, if you will please refrain from rioting in the college grounds. Aww. Baladeth could see the undead turn surprisingly pouty, especially the zombies who started kicking at the stone floor disappointedly. It was always zombies trying to start trouble. Nalagrom, Baladeth turned to face the door, otherworldly hands massaging his temples. What? At least his apprentice was responding. It had probably been the most the two had spoken in 2 days, so he took it as a win. "May I come in to talk with you in private? There's a scene out here, and I'd rather this be kept in-house." There was a pause that only grew in length as Baladeth stood in front of the door. The eyes of an untold amount of dead sat firmly upon his back. It wasn't a new scenario for him to be in, but it was always just a little unsettling, especially when you could hear the slight scratching of skeletal feet behind him. The door to the room creaked open, and all in attendance turned their attention as though they were of one mind. The creaking of dry skin and the clacking of bones could be heard as those with bodies leaned forward to get a better look. "Come on," came Nalagrom's ragged voice. Baladeth took a moment to glance over his shoulder again at the motley crew of undead that were eagerly waiting. "A little privacy." In one decidedly milling unit, the Walking Dead shifted backwards to give Baladeth a little breathing room, and to prevent eavesdroppers. With a sigh, the void in the form of a man turned, his long dark cloak fluttering slightly with the movements, and he pushed the door to the side to greet his apprentice face to face. Well, face to face might not have been the term Baladeth would have used. The sight before him, as he stepped into the only barely lit room, was one he would have pictured in a nightmare. It was a bedroom in general disarray, bed unmade, plates and platters stacked in the corner, a general depression pile of clothes in another, not a place clean or tidy, and somehow, stretched between all of them, was his apprentice, lounging like a cat on surfaces that he most definitely should not be lounging on. He seemed deflated, with his dark brown cloak hanging over and off of him like a dead balloon. His face had been turned away, and there had been a layering of familiar smoke that Baladeth was glad he could not smell. He knew what his apprentice partook in during his free time, and his apprentice had a lot of free time lately. "Hey, Baladeth." His voice reminded Baladeth of an out-of-tune accordion being played rough and floppy, somehow. "Nalagrom," Baladeth replied simply. His hands were placed behind his back as he paced into the room, the door closing behind him with a light chunk. "What brings you to my neck of the woods, boss man?" "Well, at first it was unyielding rage, but that has been replaced with desperate concern." Baladeth stepped around a plate that had the crumbly remnants of a stale sandwich to the side. Baladeth stepped around a plate that had the crumbly remnants of a stale sandwich to stand in his apprentice's general field of view. "What has happened to you, my friend? You've been on leave for months now and have hardly spoken to a soul." There was a rustling as Nalagrom's hood turned up slightly to look at Baladeth. There was no red in those eyes. There was no mad grin of wicked teeth. Just an empty hole. A husk. An artist with no muse. A painter with no brush or easel. Just a man whose will had been sapped from him. "I don't know. Just haven't had the energy to do a lot, I guess." "Coming from you, that is a surprise. I never thought you'd lose interest like this."
"Guess I'm just full of surprises, then."
Baladeth scratched at his chin, the facade of employer and employee quickly fading. Clearly, Nalagrom wasn't going to respect authority in this scenario. Not that he ever respected authority. It had probably been a losing strategy to begin with, but it was one Baladeth had to try every time, just in case. On to plan B, then. What would you say to some paid vacation time?
"I am open to conversation."
It was like a switch had turned on and new life injected itself violently into the downed man. He stood a good head under Baladeth's eyeline and was nearly swallowed by his dull brown cloak, but he still had the presence to him that demanded attention. Like a clown. Or a screaming child. "Yes, I thought that would get your attention." Baladeth raised a streaming brow, not so amused but more curious as he looked around at his apprentice's room. "Nalagrom, I think it is clear to everyone that you've hit a rut, so to speak."
"I have lost the will to believe."
"I'll have to process that existential terror later. But right now we have the immediate issue of our evil empire losing a hell of a lot of face with your absence. The kingdoms of the world are not going to terrorize themselves, and we're in a bit of a budget crisis at the moment. As such, to help you get you back in shape, we're giving you an all-expenses-paid vacation to the Crossroads."
"I have no idea what that is."
"Perfect!" Baladeth's tone had perhaps been a little too cheery, he realized, as Nalagrom's demeanor suddenly became a lot more suspicious.
"The hell does that mean?"
Baladeth didn't give him much time to piece together what was happening. He simply grabbed his apprentice by the shoulders and hucked him into the otherworldly portal made of the green glowing screams of the dead that he had manifested with his own energy. It closed just as suddenly as it had opened, with little more than the echoey sounds of the damned cries to mark its exit. Perhaps he had grown desensitized to this line of work. It was a thought he'd have to spare for later, as he stepped out of the now significantly cleaner bedroom into a crowded hall filled with overly anxious undead.
Is Nalagron gonna eat okay?
I have no idea. I've never seen the poor bastard that depressed. He's even considered going to work over paid vacation. There was a collective gasp amongst the undead, rotting fingers and bony digits rising to cover breathless mouths in horror. Some of the ghosts, so stunned by the news, were knocked off their feet and left to float in the air like rising fish.
What do we do? Cried a ghoul.
What happened to him? Howled a ghost.
We should start a riot.
No riots! Baladeth barked harshly. Upon his word, the host of undead silenced themselves and meandered readily for orders. Look, we'll get the rundown from Fred's cousin when we get to the crossroads, so be sure you get your ledgers ready and your bags packed. By my calculations, we'll have about 2 days to prepare for my apprentice, and he is going to be pissed, so be ready for a show. The cluster of undead creatures split immediately into a chorus of agreeable small talk and pleased grumbles alike. Baladeth gave a long sigh as he found himself suddenly alone in the hall again. The hook had been placed, now he just had to hope on fate. Whew. Sorry if I'm being too noisy. Taking another water break, sorry.
Where the hell am I?
Nalagram stood on the side of a crowded street, absolutely filled with people casually milling towards what appeared to be a large arena. Based off of the tiling on the rooftops and the little pointed flare to the dark tiles made, Nalagram could deduce that he had no ass-blasting idea where in the hell he had wound up. So his next choice of action was to listen and see if he could pick up on some context clues. It was a venture that failed nearly as it began, as it was plain that nobody spoke the same language.
Well, that's a problem,
he grunted irritably. He rummaged around in his cloak for a handful of somethings. One of those somethings came in the form of a small rolled-up tube about the length of his finger that definitely had a funk to it. Part of his special stash that he kept for emergencies, or Tuesdays. It might have been Tuesday, he forgot. The other something was a small black sphere that Nalagram held between his thumb and index finger. It had been attached to a chain that dangled freely from his neck. It left a small layer of soot wherever his skin made contact. In his own way of probing to see if he was capable of using magic here, he pictured the sphere as a sort of tuning fork that he channeled a bit of his soul into. It let out an unheard and unseen resonation that reached out into the world at large. The magic he had been looking for tapped back, and heat could be felt emanating from the little black ball as a spark caught. A spark turned into a small flame between his fingers, a flame that he used to light the thinking grass that sat between his teeth. The smell was immediate and encompassing, especially after he took a long drag and released it freely into the air where a number of people who had been waiting in line, and a handful of locals on the side selling things to the poor idiots, began to wrinkle their noses and drop what sounded like expletives. One of the people in line, a tall man wearing an almost gaudy amount of white and purple, strolled up with a flowing cape from the back of the line with all the flair of a showman. He was also speaking a language Nalagram didn't understand, so he had an excuse when he didn't bother listening. The man gave a flick of his dark hair, purple highlights flying, and he could continue to speak, From the general vibe that Nalagram was picking up, it seemed he was trying to peacefully tell him to be considerate or some crap. He couldn't tell, and he didn't really know the guy. He was going on, though. And on. And on. Nalagram decided to test his usual method for universal communication in the form of a prominent middle finger that rose from the folds of his cloak. At first, the motion went unnoticed. Apparently, this guy tended to talk a lot. Nalagram could respect it. He, too, liked the sound of his own voice. But once his eyes were brought to the motion, the mood changed. His greeter's brows furrowed and darkened, and his body language began to shift from cordial to arms being crossed. Nalagram noted that he saw others staring with a disapproving air to them. All right, he was getting somewhere now. As the dead air continued to hold, he took a long drag from the inciting incident in his mouth, and he had to fight back a cough as smoke billowed into his lungs. There was a grunt behind him, the stern, disapproving grunt of authority. Good. He turned around and looked up. Standing just behind was a guard who was dressed simply in red and black. He held a staff in his hand as though he knew how to use it, and his eyes were fixated on the scene in front of him. He spoke, though Nalagram still had no clue what he was saying. It was a question, though, likely asking what the issue was. From behind, he heard the first guy start yammering on and on and on again, still in that different language. The guard seemed to understand the guy. It appeared as though an effect was going on here, one that he wasn't privy to, which was all the data Nalagram needed for the time being. He continued to hold his breath and look around as the guard was distracted by the dude in white. A flick of silver on a nearby rooftop caught Nalagram's attention. With the hood, it made it easy to stare without being noticed, and he did so greedily. Behind the guard was the shape of a silver fox that stared with an all-too-knowing look in its eye. Ordinarily, Nalagram would assume it to be a curious animal, but he could tell that its attention was on him. Hell, he could swear they were almost making eye contact with him. It wasn't what he was hoping for, but something had found the beacon he had sent out. The deep frown on his face hissed away like sulfur on a match. In its place was a smirk that showed just the barest hint of sharpened teeth. A cough erupted from the white noise. It seemed like Dillhole was finally trying to get his attention. Nalagram drew his focus back to the guard, who was still disapprovingly frowning at him. Well, more specifically frowning at Nalagram's middle finger, which had not gone down the entire time he was spacing out. There was an expectant look on the guard's face, the annoyed type of expectant that said, "Are we going to have a problem here?" Nalagram opened his mouth to speak, and a plume of the foul-smelling smoke billowed out and directly into the guard's rapidly reddening face. It wasn't an undeserved ass-beating. Many of Nalagram's ass-beatings were usually something that he had coming, though perhaps tossing him into the garbage in a dank alleyway was a bit much. But sometimes that's the only place you gotta end up to get out anywhere. Still, he'd had worse in his life. The guards here were temperamental, but not beyond the point of anything reasonable. So, with this situation of being a stranger in a strange land, he did the only thing he could think of in this situation. And he went searching for the lost treasures of this world. Oh, thank you, sports ballers. Okay. His name was Exposition Jimmy, and boy howdy, he had been ready to throw hands for the 2.5 days he'd been waiting in line to take part of the God Eaters tournament. He didn't know what that was, but he didn't have the strength to turn down a mysterious animal that gave him a letter that took him to a fantastical place known as the Crossroads. He was gonna bap a MacGuffin and get a wish from a sick-ass fox god lady who does a smirk a lot to save his bedridden bus driver who'd taken ill from a mysterious disease that had no cure. But first, he'd have to get through this line, and even though he'd been here the better part of 3 days, the tryout period was almost over, with a good third of the way left untouched. It'd be impossible to enter at this rate unless he caught the attention of one of the officials in a heroic act of hero stuff meant to show how cool he was. That's how that worked. So he stepped out of line, not knowing the lifeline he had so suddenly severed, as all his attention had been drawn to a general feeling of doom that he felt lingering in the air. Exposition Jimmy walked into a nearby alleyway where he felt a generally bad vibe. Of course, knowing about it meant that he was totally safe in doing this, and it was not at all a bad idea to not inform any authority figure in the immediate vicinity. It was an equally okay idea to continue exploring so he could see the beginnings of an evil plot which would not put his life in any real danger whatsoever. So he saw a man in a hood slinking about and decided not to mind his own business because he got a bad feeling about a weird person that was kind of stinky and began chasing him around a corner and away from any witnesses. "Hey, you!" Exposition Jimmy exclaimed as he pointed at the man he had been following. "What the hell?" The hooded man was totally caught off guard by Exposition Jimmy. "You were gonna do bad stuff for your nondescript Dark Lord to ultimately force a confrontation with the god of the Crossroads God Eater to prove your god's power is ultimate, weren't you?" "Dude, I just got here." "And you were gonna do it by hiding your presence using your god's influence over the dead because we're playing games that mortals by nature cannot comprehend at any meaningful scale." "How do you know this?" "And you were gonna use the sandwich I threw away 3 weeks ago to..." Exposition Jimmy saw his shadow as the mysterious menacing man manifested a mighty, meaty fire. And Exposition Jimmy probably died. Anyway. Saki had been spending the last half day in the mostly empty Fox's Den, entertaining the occasional straggler. Most of her would-be patrons were outside waiting for an opportunity to impress the God Eater, or were scoping out potential competition. Sightseeing and depression drinking usually started shortly after the roster for the grand tournament was fully announced. Then the unbelievable rushes would follow. She gave a deep and low sigh of boredom as she ran the same rag over the same mugs, dusted the same countertops, and readjusted the same poster that had been plastered all over the other nearby businesses and homes. Some had tried to post them on her door, but her reputation for dealing with vandals and being a previous victor of the tournament kept rabble-rousers away. She did find it rather dull in the off periods, though. A fox, pure white, with a circle drawn on its head to mark it as a familiar, leapt onto her table and tilted its head with a knowing look. "It'll be fine, little one. You can tell the God Eater that by the end of the week I'll be yearning for this boredom again." A large figure scratched at the creature's neck, which it accepted readily. A large and very poofy tail rose in enjoyment, and little fox chirps of joy let from the creature's still-closed mouth. Then a very prominent growl and bark escaped from a very open mouth as the familiar pulled away and spun around. It wasn't just the hackles that were risen, but the hair all along its back and tail stuck straight up in stress and discomfort. Saki, not really accustomed to seeing this from one of the God Eater's familiars, retracted her hand before the small white fox got it into its head to start biting. Not that it would have mattered too much. A moment of hissing and barking was followed by it kicking off of the table, as though it were chasing something. Or being chased. Either way, the fox was now sprinting and spranging off of just about every surface in her bar, barking and yapping and gnashing its teeth. Saki, for her part, reached for a nearby broom to see if she could assist, though for the life of her she had no idea what had gotten into the creature. Weapon in hand, she rushed from around the other side of the bar, only to find that the fox had already bolted from the establishment, still gnashing its teeth as if it were in a fight. "What in the hell was that?" she said to herself. She scratched at the back of her wine-red hair in morbid confusion. The Oni looked about the establishment to find that it felt significantly emptier without the little critter around. She grunted under her breath and turned back to the bar to see if she could get more work done, only to find a newcomer leaning silently against the wooden surface. At least she thought they were leaning. It was hard to tell considering the entirety of the person was engulfed in a thick brown cloak. "Something I can help you with, stranger?" Saki asked as she began to return to her usual spot up behind the bar. The person turned their head, but otherwise didn't give a response. She was about to say something again, but gave pause as something unpleasant hit her nose. She stopped in her tracks and gave another sniff to find the source. "You want to fight about it? I'll square up," came a ragged voice from behind the darkness of the hood. The voice was mildly shocking, but the language he spoke was what made her double take. Namely, that she could tell he was speaking another language. That wouldn't end well for you," she replied casually. "Oh, you speak Goblin." Immediately, the man's demeanor changed, and he straightened up to face the bartender directly. Saki offered a shrug in response. "I've had interesting patrons in the past. Also, you smell." "Thank you!" The man placed a hand on his chest as though he were flattered. Based on how he spoke, Saki might have actually believed that. Well, luckily you've caught me in a dead period, so I won't bounce you, though I will ask what the deal is with the stench.
Tossed in the garbage.
That easy, huh? Well, what brings you to my place? The Oni raised a brow as an amused smile crept onto her face.
Desperation. Boredom. Think I was kidnapped too, but knowing my boss, it's probably some bullshit about the vacation he's been going on about.
The ragged man grabbed at a glass of water that she had slid onto the table in front of him. He drank it greedily. Huh. Well, I guess that explained the language barrier. Usually the God Eater takes care of that when people first arrive. Curious as to why that hasn't applied to you. The man wiped an invisible mouth and stared up at her face, curiosity radiating from the empty black hole.
God Eater, he stated. Sounds a bit awkward to say. That your local governing body? We have full-on anarchy here? I could be down for that, but I don't got my groove going, so it'd probably be a mess.
No. The God Eater is our guardian deity.
Name the God Eater.
It was given to her after she... Well... Saki rubbed at the back of her head. The absolute mass of hair flopped and floated as a single entity.
Ate the previous guardian deity.
The Oni gave a shrug of her massive shoulders. Honestly, you'd probably have to talk to her about it. I know the broader details, but the nitty-gritty would be on her marker.
Huh. Still a dumb name.
Saki's amused grin slipped at the comment, but her demeanor remained for the most part unchanged. It had been an opportunity for conversation that she'd been missing since Shifu was nowhere to be found. Bet yours isn't much better. Do you even have a name, stranger?
Nalagram works if you're that needy for it. You?
You can call me Saki. I'm the owner of this bar. Nalagram nodded as he looked around curiously. Perhaps too curiously for Saki's liking. He seemed casual, even a bit scatty, but there was an air of assessment coming from him that marked him as more than what he let on.
Expensive place to be so empty. Sorry for your loss.
Saki waved a dismissive hand as she took his glass from him. Don't worry too much about it. Everyone's currently out and about for the tournament sign-ups. By round 1, this place will be packed to the brim. She watched as the newcomer grabbed the framed poster and began to assess it. She inwardly hissed at his nasty little hands grabbing her things, but she could probably just wipe it off later.
Tournament, huh? Guess that explained the rowdy guards and giant-ass line.
Yep, the Crossroads Tournament, hosted by the Madam of the Crossroads. Or the God Eater, if that makes it easier. The poster tapped back onto the table, and Nalagram reeled his head back in a groan.
Is she gonna have 1,000,000 titles, too? Because I can have the same experience back home with my boss, and I don't have the capacity to memorize a bunch of different names for what essentially builds up to be the biggin.
That brought an amused chuckle from Saki as she brought out another glass of water. This one he sipped at more gingerly. No, just Madam of the Crossroads and the God Eater, at least as far as I know. Though on the subject of your boss, what do you do for a living? Might help explain why you're here in my place thinking it up. Nalagram nodded as he took another gulp before setting his glass down.
I'm a necromancer by trade. Technically I'm still an apprentice, which mostly translates to being my boss's toady.
Like those guys that summon dead folks and ghosts and stuff. Saki couldn't help but feel her eyes shoot up at the word necromancer. Not that she was necessarily afraid of death, but she didn't know how she felt meddling with forces like that.
It's a broader field than you'd expect. Most of your core classes tend to be about communication and interpretation. Sometimes we raise the dead, but more often than not it's a fuel source thing.
His explanation was casual, desensitized, bored even. Like the conversation at hand was a perfectly normal thing to be talking about. Huh. So what about your boss? What's his deal?
Oh, he's the Dark Lord, conqueror of nations, destroyer of kingdoms.
She blinked as silence set in. She stared blankly at Nalagram as she waited for a joke or a punchline. When none came, she leaned in again to get a better look of the fellow. So you're the apprentice to the actual Dark Lord where you come from, like horrible armies that wreak havoc across the countryside.
Well, it's mostly me that does a lot of the grunt work, but yeah, that's the gist of it.
She stared down at the man in disbelief. This guy, who stood more than a head shorter than her and couldn't have weighed more than 180 pounds soaking wet, was a servant of a horrible and powerful tyrant. She served all types, but that was a bit of a stretch. Not buying it, she finally replied after another moment of assessment.
The dingus dangus, you mean you're not buying it?
The man spun his head up to look at her dead in the eye. Offense rang in his voice. I mean, I'm not buying that you're some apprentice of some evil fantasy villain floating about plotting the downfall of civilization. For starters, the God Eater wouldn't let someone so dangerous go running around unimpeded in her own home. Hell, if you were brought here, you'd more than likely be an honored guest, invited to join the tournament only to get your ass handed to you when you get too big for your britches. It was perhaps a bit overly harsh, but this Nalagram guy was more of an assault on her nostrils than a threat to the crossroads. Though the little man didn't back down. Hell, he doubled down as he stood up to the fullest extent of his unimpressive height.
Unimpeded my ass. I ain't been able to speak the language since I got here. There sure as shit ain't nobody here to generate a comprehend language spell. Besides, what makes you so confident that this God Eater can take me on? I'm the damn headliner here.
Because her personal apartment sits on top of my establishment, and I've seen her do things you can only dream of, deadhead.
Oh, really?
Nalagram replied with sudden interest, a wide, toothy grin spreading on his face. She might have been a good deal taller, broader, and more intimidating than him, but something about the way he said that made her spine tingle.
Well, seeing as how I don't got a place to stay for the night, and I don't know when my boss is gonna pick me up, how's about renting the room out to me for the time being?
In your dreams, toady. Like I'd let someone calling themselves the Dark Lord's apprentice stay in my place, even if the room wasn't permanently booked. The grin on his face deepened, and she could have sworn she saw a glint of red behind the edge of his hood.
Guess we'll see about that,
he said chipperly as he stood up from his seat. She rolled her eyes at the gesture. Well, good luck with that. Only way I'm giving you entrance to that room is if she lets you in there. And I'm sorry to say, my guy, that you're not her type. The little man shrugged as he turned to leave, extending a hand out in a friendly gesture.
Guess there's only one way to find out. Thanks for the water.
Thanks for the conversation, Saki replied, her large hand engulfing his as she shook it gently. Then she stopped. Something felt wrong. His hand was sticky, slimy, and not at all pleasant to hold. She sniffed. What's on your hand?
Mayonnaise.
His body made a very satisfying bounce on the ground as she flung him out the front door. Though he didn't stay down for long, he quickly rose to his feet and gave a dramatic wave, as his cloak fluttered in the breeze. He then swiftly disappeared down a nearby side street. She could have sworn that she saw deep red eyes peering from underneath that hood at her, and as he scurried off into the rapidly descending evening, she couldn't help but feel as though she had released something truly awful into her home. Getting water. Okay, hello, gang. Quick water break. That was a lot of talking. I was just getting that one out of the way, this one out of the way first because I was going to have to do that. Ooh. Gonna need a break after that one. We'll put it on the list, Prometheus. Is Prometheus here? Okay. This one I'm actually going to have to take a couple of minutes to relax my voice for. Gosh. Yeah. Gonna mute myself real quick while I do some exercises. Okay, she sells seashells down by the seashore. Blah. I'll do that real muted for a little bit so it doesn't become insufferable. Alright, continuing. Nalagram couldn't explain why, but it had been like an extinguished fire coming to life from the last remaining embers. He stepped in time with music that blared in his own head as magic freely reached to him. His cloak billowed freely in the breeze as he skipped, hopped, and danced along the path that had been laid before him. There were screams, of course. Children cried in the streets, women fled holding their infants, and men who thought themselves strong bent over and began retching as he rounded the corner. Most just passed out, falling in place from towers, others in the middle of chores. One wound up face first on a washing board. He was in rare form today, a wicked and mad grin plastered on his own face as he swept readily and freely through the flocks of hopefuls and citizens. Bells rang to greet him, and guards ran to see him. Guards that were quickly incapacitated by his mere presence alone. He was fine, of course. Having been in the College of Necromancy did have its advantages. One only had to picture the stench from a place called the flesh-grafting chambers to understand the day-to-day life of dealing with death. Long had his sense of smell been dulled, freeing him from the consequences of his inconvenience that he struck to the citizens and competitors alike. It was a gift he wished to bestow upon this guardian deity, but she was nowhere to be seen, nor were the little foxes that he was certain marked her influence. There were, however, undead. Ghosts, specifically, that could not be seen, for they lacked the energy to be given form. He, the apprentice of death, would give them a show to remember as the cheers overran the jeers and fears of the fleeing populace. "You there, young lad!" the necromancer shouted at a nearby floating ghost who was, at best, the back end of Ancient. An empty face with a dangling eye turned to greet him. "Who, me?" the ghost asked in a hollow and curious tone. "Yes, you there, lad. You look like you've been here for some time. I'm looking for this God-Eater. Where might I find her?" Those who were not completely incapacitated looked at him as though he were insane. None could understand him, that had been established some time ago, but they could tell he was talking to someone that was not there by their standards. "Why, sir, she is speaking to the King of the Hollow Crown," the old man stated with what appeared to be renewed vigor. He spun and pointed to a nearby building, tall and red, that looked like a tower. "He has brought his host of undead with him whilst she tries to contain us at the sacred forest." Nalagram offered a low and dramatic bow, an action mostly hidden by his cloak so as to keep the dreaded source of smell secret from any onlookers. "Thank you, kind sir. As a reward, I would like to end your existence in this place and send you to the realm of the dead." "Finally!" The old man threw his hands up in joyous redemption. He floated in the air, his clothes fluttering freely in the breeze. He was then pulled into Nalagram's free hand as the necromancer began to pull magic from the air. The form of the ghostly old man coalesced into a glowing ball that now all those around could see. Nalagram inhaled and smoke from the orb floated into his mouth. It tasted a bit like marshmallow, if he was being honest. When the ball finally dissipated, Nalagram reeled his head back and looked around. "Behold, chump biscuits! For now I have learned your language, and I speak for the dead. You shall know agonies that you never would have expected, and your god ain't shit. So be warded, stay out of my way,
for I have business to attend to.
The crowd that had formed a generous circle around him gasped in shock and horror. The locals muttered to themselves, and the guards dare not approach, despite their weapons being drawn. No longer just wielding stabs, they had blades at the ready and fear in their hearts. "He is mad!" cried a woman from the back. "He will doom us all!" sobbed a man near the front who was desperately trying to get away. "I'm gonna puke!" That was just a kid. They probably didn't even know what was going on right now. It had been freeing, finally able to grasp the dead and to speak the language of the locals. It seemed as though his boss had finally arrived. Good. Nalagram had a few choice words he was saving for Baladeth, one of which might have been thanks, but then the rest were best reserved in private to keep the PG-13 rating of the story. Nalagram raised a finger and pointed at a very familiar guard who was currently clenching his nose shut, as though it were the only thing keeping him alive. When he noticed the finger, he began to quake and shake in abject terror.
"You, go to the sacred forest and tell them of the apprentice's arrival. Do this, or I shall take a crap on thine coffee table."
There was a moment of confusion, but the spirit of the threat was there. The guard and several others backed away whilst looking like they were about to Ralph all over the ground. Then, with a clattering of armor and weapons, they took off in the direction of the tower. The townsfolk, who had just seen their protectors flee, broke what little rank they had and fled. Screams of terror and wails of woe filled the air with their departure. With the roads rapidly clearing around him, true life of this place came to him. Ghosts floated from the dark crevices of places they were forced to hide, to escape the onslaught of the living. They made forms that they had previously been too weak to create for themselves. They floated around him with patient looks in their eyes, each in various states to indicate their method of death, and at their front, a prancing cat that looked all too pleased with itself stood proudly. There were 20 in total.
"All right, gang, we got ourselves an audience with an overpaid receptionist known as the God Eater. She's got a good reputation, so we gotta make sure this looks classy."
Nalagram's voice rang out loudly over the mild mayhem of the undead as he clapped his hands for their attention, though admittedly it was more for the attention of the members of the living that it would have been watching. If they could stomach the current state of the area, that is.
"I want to see some great energy out there to wake up those old bones before I kick your sorry hides back to the underworld, so you can catch some sleep. So we're going to be doing this in 4/4 time. Anyone good with them, pick up an instrument. Otherwise, just pass me your soul when you think it's thematically appropriate."
One of the ghosts, a younger man with a cleaver stuck in his neck, stepped forwards with a hand raised. "Do you have a song in mind for us, sir?"
"Nah, surprise me. We're doing this freeform style. I want to get an idea for what kind of vibe y'all can put out."
Nalagram gave a dismissive wave of his hand as the fellow stepped back. "Are we really going to just straight up assault the God Eater?" Another voice, a woman who seemed to have been bundled up as though she were laid up sick. Nalagram clasped his hands together and gave a nod as his attention turned to her.
"Damn skippy we are, and we're going to do it in front of a crowd."
"But she knows everything that happens here. She's a god. She's omnipotent. She can walk through realms, she can. All she has to do is look at you, and she knows everything you've done and every choice you've made. She's a trickster, too. You never know what she might have in store for you." The crowd got riled up. None of them split to leave, however. The air had been more of curiosity than of outrage, or even fear. These were people that had known tranquility and peace for years upon years upon years. They had likely seen feats that would make most mortals fall to their knees and prostrate, and had likely seen the status quo survive the test of time.
"Have you lost your spirits so quickly? Do you not know who I represent? I am he who serves the hollow crown. And if there is one thing I have learned in service to a god, just because you know everything doesn't mean you're prepared for anything. This place has grown soft, like sand that compresses and stops pressure from the outside. However, I am here today to provide a different kind of pressure."
The crowd, swayed by the speech, nodded and muttered to themselves in agreement. Their various dangling bits and weeping wounds flailed about, though they seemed unbothered by the affair. After their brief meeting, Nalagram saw them wielding various instruments. Some he recognized, others he didn't. Either way, it was sure to produce an interesting sound.
"Now then, 4/4 time, from the top."
Okay. Voice break. Again, this one will be a little bit shorter.
Water.
All right, break over.
This is what you've sent me? This was worth the insult? This was worth wasting my time?
She held his unconscious form in one of her hands. His stupid, ugly, fashionless, dumb, moron head dangled limply to the side as he sent out pained gurgles from his open mouth. Bruises from a dozen flaming skeletal fists marked every inch of his body. Yet despite it all, the hood remained. Maladeth stood in his usual place, unfazed with his hands behind his back. The rest of the undead behind him stared on blankly, white and empty eyes absorbing all that happened around them.
What was your goal today? To throw a punch so I could break your hand? I had heard you were audacious, but surely I didn't figure you were stupid as well.
Reality bent even more around the God Eater as cracks in the fabric of dimensions distorted with her stored and latent power. The recovering guards around her shuffled uneasily away, now completely unsure of where safety was.
This bumbling buffoon, this mewling moron, this damn idiot was the best you had to offer me.
The grip around her pipe tightened. The unlit leaves sitting in the bowl rustled with a few falling lazily to the ground. She brought the limp form of Nalagrom in front of her to glower with all the authority of her office. Her nine-tailed hair raised above her head as a side effect of her meddling with the fabric of dimensions.
You had best provide me one good reason why I shouldn't snap your neck for your insolence in front of my men, your master, and the dead themselves.
She growled. Oh, I completely misread that.
You had best provide me one good reason why I shouldn't snap your neck for your insolence in front of my men, your master, and the dead themselves.
She growled, only barely loud enough for all those to hear. It was an easy effect, as there was silence from all those around her. The necromancer's hooded head tilted up slightly, and his infuriating smirk was still plastered upon his face. His deep red eyes met hers with no fear, merely amusement, as though she were the one at the disadvantage.
"Need a light?"
he asked as he brought up a small orb no larger than a pearl on a chain. Her eyes widened in shock, and her hair fell down in a single mass as, across time and space, and across every world with which she spoke to him and held him, he lit a small fire between his fingers and set it gently into her pipe. It was an action that pierced the veil of realities, something that should have been so improbable that the odds of it happening in her lifetime, even one as a god, were so negligible it should have been zero. Yet here he was, working as a single universal constant in her very hands. Each and every version of him the same smile, the same flame. She dropped him with a dull thud onto the still warm stone ground, to which he let out an unceremonious "Ow!" She hadn't noticed when Baladeth had stood next to her. She had been so enraptured by the display she had seen. She simply knew that he was there now, staring down at the beaten and battered body of his apprentice as though he were staring at a prized pig. He nudged the ragged mortal's body with a foot, bringing a bemoaned gurgle from the man. "Impressive, isn't he?" the King of the Hollow Crown asked with a raised brow. Smugness was baked into his features. Her eyes sat on him for longer than they should have. He had been everything she despised. The man was an assault on the very idea of authority, even if that authority was his own god's. There would be no way for him to be put under control, even under the best of circumstances. He was arrogant, he was an utter buffoon, overestimated his own abilities, and was ready to fight anyone that was put in front of him. And yet, "I do believe I would like to consider his application, Lord of Monos." Danger seemed to envelop the land as the words left her mouth. From the ground, she could have sworn she heard the snapping of bones as the previously unconscious man began to move. He had the widest, most evil grin she had ever seen in her entire life.
That's great, 'cause I got some conditions.
She had called it the Oni Shrine, so far as Baladeth could remember. It was a quaint place, snowy, despite the time of year, which suggested magic was at play. Despite the name suggestion, it was quite the peaceful place. A building for changing and service of customers was set up before a series of hot springs. The place was empty of the living, save for him, the staff, and Nalagram, who had gone out to get undressed for the occasion. It was something he no doubt would have appreciated in a previous life. Not that he didn't enjoy it for what it was, but the effect was lost when feeling was a sensation reserved for others and not him. He strolled casually to one of the empty pools in the center with naught but the image of a towel that he made around his waist. The vague impression of a naked torso was put on display for those interested, though it was all a show, truthfully. A show more to him than those around him, either way. A gingerly placed flaming foot in the surface of the water and immediately began boiling. The boiling spread quickly to the outer edges of the pool, and steam blotted out all vision from the outside sources. He let out a long and forlorn sigh as he lowered his body the rest of the way into the violently bubbling water. A few moments passed of blissful silence, only to be followed by the sounds of a telltale crash and violent swearing.
You dick! You could have waited until I got into the water!
Nalagram's voice cut through the peace like an obsidian knife. The noise was only brought an inward smirk from Baladeth as he settled into place. I'm in the center. See if you can. A splash erupted from the opposite end of the pool. Baladeth's vision focused on the source as the telltale hood of his apprentice broke the surface of the water. He was shirtless, pantless, perhaps, but it was hard to tell. The cloak never really left. It was a strange quirk, but Baladeth could respect one to keep his identity secret even still.
Don't you think our generous host will be pissed when she finds out you boiled all the water out of her hot water bath?
Nalagram asked. He seemed completely unfazed by the temperature of the water. Possibly. We can use this as an opportunity to run some control drills. His apprentice gave a derisive snort.
Always work with you.
There's always work to do, Baladeth replied simply. He noted that Nalagram got comfortable on the edge and raised a finger that he began to twirl around.
Right. So what's the drill we're running today?
Try to keep the steam centered on our pool using the heat you generate. I'm certain you've got an idea as to how large this place is. Baladeth's head tilted up as he stared at the swirling cloud of mist above him. As he spoke, the steam's momentum changed entirely, beginning to spin round and round in a counterclockwise circle. The same motion that Nalagram happened to be continuing with his hand. So what do you think of the crossroads, my apprentice?
This place blows.
Nalagram's reply was curt, quick, full of energy, and will to do something. Baladeth wasn't sure what, but it was there. If he could, a grin would have grown on his face. A seed had been planted somewhere in his soul. That would be enough for him at the very least. What makes you say that? I dare say that they're not want for anything here. Nalagram gave an annoyed chuff.
Yeah, it's boring, happy, peaceful, and blissfully unaware of issues that happen outside its own boundaries. It's got status quo labeled all over it.
And it might be something that you're interested in playing with? Even in the mist, Baladeth could see the wide and toothy grin that the necromancer gave.
I didn't say I was leaving, did I? Though there's still the matter of my lodging to be taken care of.
Oh, you've chosen a place to stay already?
I might have found someone to put me up.
Baladeth gave a low chuckle as the fog pooled more and more around them, getting more centralized and dense with each passing second. He suspected that it would start to rain soon, were it to continue. I guess we'll have to wait for her decision. Now then, how did you take care of the cross guards?
If I told you, it'd ruin the magic, boss man.
Baladeth chose not to comment. Instead, he found himself content to just enjoy the bubbling of the hot spring before the tournament began. He had the feeling it was going to be an eventful weekend. Okay, that is my audition finished up. I'm currently in the audition list, so if anyone wants to hop in now, we can start putting a rest on my voice and start getting other people involved in the audition. Hello, Tort. Thank you. It got to the point where it's just like, oh no, I have added more and more to it. Okay, here. Toast, since you were the first one to request today, or at least the first one that I see that's currently in the lineup, we'll go ahead and start up with yours. Thanatoaster. There we go. Okay, sure. We'll go ahead and do Goat after Toast, and then we'll do Prometheus. At this moment in time, let me go ahead and, did I open up their Google Drive yet? All right. Actually, let me go ahead and hello, Toast. We're going to be doing your audition. Yes. And if anyone wants to join in, is of course open invitation. If you want to do some voice worker reading with me, this is sort of an open invitation situation. Hey, that's fine. I will, yeah. Yeah. I think so far, out of all the ones I've read, mine has been the longest. I get very rambly. Need more water. Oh, Lord Plague. We'll get to that one then. Hey, the fact that you got it finished is fantastic. And 9 pages is nothing to sneeze at. Like, especially when you have those days where you're just sitting there and going like, I can only get 1 page done at a time. Currently I'm in a Discord chat, Sports Ballers. If you're not in the, sorry, I'm talking to Twitch chat. Let me mute myself here. Sports Ballers, we're in a Discord currently. If you're not part of the Discord, then it'll just sort of be me talking to the rest of a VC. This is for an OCT that we're currently getting done. But hello, and welcome to, it's good to see you. It was exhausting. Okay, let me get this last sip of water, and we'll... Toast, did you have a, did you have an idea as to what your OC sounded like? Is there any, like, dialogue in this? I haven't read your audition yet, so, when we see a character, is there any, like, preferences for voices? Or voice claims. Actually, let me get a look at your OCs real quick. It's the wrong button. Okay, I see. The layout. Okay. Aztacronopilus. 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 Soul Calibur. Aztacronopilus. 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 And Curiata. Okay. I think I got this. No, Baladeth is going to insist using his whole name every time. Let's see. Nalagram would resort to that douche, though. Oh, no problem, sports ballers. The crackle of the bonfire was the only thing breaking the uncanny silence of the night. The hollow, still air felt like it could carry the sound of a smile across the sea. The cool, crisp mist adding a sense of foreboding. The warmth of the fire cut through the heavy gloom, its glow on Kiriata's face a welcome part of the night shift. Her allies were huddled in tents, the modern amenities of their age about 50 miles or so to the south. The stones and shrubs of the scrubland around her glistened, the dew catching the moonlight of the cloudless sky above, reflecting the stars in some earthly mimicry. The faintest breeze kicked up the soft caress, bringing her back to reality. Mind suddenly aflame with her task, the reason she and her crew were out in the desert and everything that had happened to get them here, she took a slow, deep breath, eyes closed, fists clenched around the haft of her halberd. Things certainly spiraled out of hand since she'd set off on this adventure with her patron and companion, Azta. A simple phone call, a request from an old friend rippling on out into something she could barely comprehend. A domestic life with the last shred of her family's god wasn't what she figured she'd be doing as an adult. But she also never expected her ancestral home to be raided by some violent, mystery douchebags, the only one of her line still accounted for afterwards. The memory is desperate and angry and orange, and it's been her and Azta since. A young woman picking up the pieces, and an old god pining for the good old days. She looked around the camp, at each tent, each mark in the dirt, took in the scent of the night, the fire, and fading traces of dinner in the air. They picked up more companions in their travels, each with their own reason to travel, and each one sticking out like a sore thumb in their own way. To Kiri's priestess and Azta's forgotten, they've added the revolutionary, the hero, the politician, the discarded, the storm, and the machine to all their ranks. All but one currently snug and asleep. The machine, instead, perched on an outcropping of rock overlooking the campsite, scribbling away in a notebook, outlined dramatically by the moon behind him. Catching Kiri's glance, he looked up, waved excitedly, and returned to his notes, blank obsidian face faintly flickering with the glow of its fire. Silently laughing to herself, Kiri smiled an exhausted smile, glad to know that if she fell asleep, there was at least a small chance someone would notice if something went wrong, though she doubted he'd be able to pull himself away from his notes long enough to both see and do something about it. Hell, he'd probably whip out a camera and start recording The Tragedy of Camp Cactus. The thought made her chuckle to herself again, ignoring the fear and likeliness of the scenario. She probably needed better friends, huh? With a sigh, she leaned her weight against her polearm, its butt dug into the dirt beneath her. Her mind wandered again, to the activities of the next morning, to the comfort of the night, to the wanting this moment to be longer, the tranquility of rarity nowadays. In the haze of half-sleep, she drifted, mind's eye swirling with everything that had led her here. meeting her companions, uncovering mysteries that beget more mysteries. The traveling, oh, how many places they'd gone, the new foods, new languages, new people, new thoughts and feelings. She wasn't sure how much time had passed since she dozed off, but the moon had shifted its place in the sky, and the rustle of waking came from some of the tents. But the thing that had snapped her back into the now wasn't any of this. It was, in fact, a cold metallic hand on her shoulder, gently but firmly shaking her awake. "Kiri." She heard a familiar groan as she didn't visibly respond. "Kiriata." Still not moving, mind in the process of booting up, she felt the grip tighten, sending a shock of pain through her collarbone. She yelped, angry and incredulous, and snapped her head about to see Azta kneeling next to her, expression his typical dour. "Fuck, dude, I'm up! You are the least patient, timeless jackass I know." Despite the apparent rigidity of his face, Azta still managed to furrow his brow. "I art the only," he sighed, raising his hands in air quotes, "timeless jackass thou'st knowest." Rising back to full height, only to slouch forward and cross his arms, he looked down at his comparatively tiny partner in, usually literal, crime. Now that thou've designed to join the world of the conscious, something's amiss. Neither thou nor our," he glanced back to the rock where their mechanical companion was still riding away, "scribe, seem to have taken notice, so I thank thee most heartily." He continued, sarcasm accentuated not only by his eccentric speech pattern, but an exaggerated bow that took a solid 5 seconds of wrist flicking before bringing his arms in front of him and leaning forward. She squinted with a heavy pout that could crush glass into powder. "Then do something about it, your loneliness. Everyone else is getting up anyways. Take one of the nerds with you. Go do a little perimeter check or something. I don't know." She shot back, her arms now also crossed in indignation. Azta's eyes widened slightly in tired confusion. It seemed the gravity of the situation had not been properly conveyed, and as he searched for the right words, he saw Kiri grabbing her polearm that had fallen into the dirt during her nap, and was suddenly staring down its business end. Taking quick, controlled jabs towards him, she grumbled, "Go on, get!" Go on, get! In a faux southern accent, and probably some joke about their current surroundings, but coming off simply as obnoxious. He rolled his eyes. "Break fast while I investigate, then." With that, he head off to the edge of the campsite. "Break fast while I investigate, then." With that, he headed off to the edge of the campsite, the living metal of his body glinting in the first rays of the sunrise. Long frayed cloak catching an errant breeze as the world began to wake. Hugging her halberd to her chest, Kiri sighed, looking listlessly at the ground. The fire had died down while she was mostly asleep. Now nothing but a few embers left. She thought she was funny, at least. Regardless, food was probably important. A weird number of her crew were still skilled at cooking, to the point Kiri had been banned from that particular chore, out of what they insisted was a mercy to the rest of the camp. The politician and the hero emerged from their shared tent, the former an elven man that didn't seem to have updated his fashion sense since their world's equivalent of the Victorian era, and the latter a short, modern woman with the tail of a pangolin clumsily slapping the tent behind her. Seeing the hero, Kiri turned her earth-shattering pout towards her. "Food, please. Food, please." Shifting her gaze quickly to the politician, gesturing behind her and tone briefly curt. "And you. Azta's out looking for something wrong if you want to go." The hero forced an awkward smile as the politician simply shrugged and wandered off in the direction Kiri pointed. "He needs breakfast too, Kiri. I mean, it's going to take you a bit to make, right? They'll probably both be back in a few minutes anyway." The hero opened her mouth to respond, but was caught off by the sounds of shouting and, quite frankly, unhinged shenanigans off in the distance. Azta and the politicians' voices, carrying over the still morning air and echoing off the rocks scattered throughout the scrubland, an explosion followed. No. Black. Also plays a bit. An explosion followed by what he would try to convince you was a very masculine shriek, and "It fucking bit me! Grab it!" rang out, further followed by what could be compared to the sound of a car slamming into a rock at Mach fuck, likely Asta's metallic body getting very quickly acquainted with the ground. "After it!" he shouted from the dirt, voice in full serious mode, carrying as much of his former status as he possibly could. Noticing the tall forms of Asta and the politician before their quarry, the hero and Kiri looked towards the other two, sprinting back towards camp, concern and confusion plastered across their faces. In the mist of the morning light, it was hard to notice the tiny, fluffy, probably equally concerning fox sprinting as fast as its little legs could carry it. But a bark from the politician, shouting and pointing at the critter, drew Kiri's attention to it. "That beast is the source of my discomfort. It is incorrect!" Asta struggled to get out through his sudden exhaustion, slowing down as he got close to the camp proper, eventually doubling over to catch his breath, mind reeling at the limits of mortals. The politician was faring a bit better, managing to herd the fox towards the center of camp where the hero and Kiri were staring in stunned silence. "I don't think it's a monster or a spirit, but it's definitely an asshole," the politician groaned, winded and annoyed as he watched the critter bound towards Kiri. Its ears folded back and fur floofed up so much it might as well be a ball. It frantically started pawing at Kiri's leg, and without much thought, Kiri lifted the panicked fox up by its little dog arms, clearly having no idea how to hold such a small animal. Hello, were my friends bullying you?" she asked, reflexively babying the tiny cute little animal and getting a squeaky yap in reply. "Kiriata, release that creature. Thou should not be near it, much less touching it," Asta growled from the edge of camp, still immobilized from the dead sprint. Not breaking her gaze, Kiri kept talking at the fox. "Why, did the big scary death god try to hurt you? Did he think that because he doesn't recognize something it's inherently wrong again?" Condescending tone, loud enough to make sure Asta could hear every word. "You're not an eldritch abomination, though. You're just a scared little guy," she continued, wiggling the fox a bit, eliciting another yap. Its fur started unpanic floofing, and, with a flick of its snoot, an envelope popped into existence in its mouth. It wiggled, mimicking the motion Kiri subjected it to earlier, and with another impulsive motion, Kiri took it out of the fox's mouth with her own, gently placing the creature down afterwards, and grabbing the letter from herself and holding it like a normal human. "Kiri!" Asta groaned with all the gusto of an Kiri! Asta groaned with all the gusto of an exasperated dad watching his kid chase down the people at a block party with a Roman candle. To be fair, this isn't the weirdest thing that's happened this week, friend. Came a consolation from the politician, now joining Asta in the sprint regret, slumped over a rock, staring upwards, questioning every decision that led him here. Fumbling with the deep crimson envelope, Kiri finally managed to pry it open and pull out its contents. A fairly plain letter in fancy sloping calligraphy, sending Kiri's mind back a decade to learning cursive from a private tutor in her family's richly adorned library. Physically shaking her head out of it, she started reading, mumbling out loud to herself to keep focused. Voice getting increasingly mock British as she went, "Cordially invited tournament, grand prize, your truest heart's desire." Neat. Looking to the hero and holding up the letter, she asked, "How evil is this thing? Asta wasn't right, was he?" The hero squinted at the parchment, eyes flashing a light blue. "No, it's fine. Magical and definitely alien, sure, but not anything I recognize as evil, no." Taking it back in two hands, Kiri looked down at the letter again, glancing between it and its messenger. Another yap, and what she could have sworn was a mischievous smile from a creature very normally incapable of such an expression left her scowling. "What are you up to, lil' guy?" Another yap, and a tear ripped through the air beside it, expanding to mimic what Kiri could only interpret as a sizable flat-screen television, complete with weird travel ad as the screen slideshowed its way through several tourist-trappy-looking locations. The machine atop the rock snapped his head so fast towards the tear he could give a mantis shrimp's punch a run for its money, and in a mere moment had teleported himself down to join everyone else crowded around the dead campfire, hunched over, notebook in hand, staring at the screen. Absolutely fascinating! Intentionally half-baked teleportation magic serving as a window. How efficient! The fox floofed up again, this time in pride at the glowing praise. Popping behind Kiri, reading over her shoulder at lightspeed, the machine went, "My dear Kyria, if you've no interest in this creature's offer, I'd gladly take it, if said creature allows." A cold pang shot through her chest, the sudden thought of the invitation being taken suddenly making it matter. No, I think she stammered for the words. Everything started to click and become real. A wish, essentially, right? A wish is the prize for a fighting tournament? I mean, she looked at the machine. You actively avoid combat. There's no way. Ah, correct. I believe I was getting ahead of myself. But perhaps I would be allowed to accompany you, he asked, looking at the fox. It tilted its head and did its best to approximate a humanoid shrug. Thou canst not possibly be considering accepting this fiend's offer, Asta snapped from his current position on the ground, sitting hunched over and cross-legged. Breathlessly, the politician snapped back, Oh, knock it off. Young lass mentioned a wish. That's the most realistic way to get yours, you daft old man. The letter seems addressed to her specifically, and you're sort of attached at the hip. So, he pointed up towards the screen, maybe swallow that massive ego of yours. I'll hold down the fort here, probably. Maybe, possibly. Yeah. His arm slumped back to the ground unceremoniously. If it's a trap or a trick of some sorts, I'm positive us lot will find a way to pull you two back out. It's not like they'd be too far outside of what we normally do in any case. At that, the hero, still flabbergasted but catching up, looked towards Asta, giving him a determined thumbs up and nod in reassurance. Yeah, we got this, she cheered. Plus, maybe time works different there, or we can keep up communications, or something, but no, you should both go in case it is real, because, yeah, I can't imagine any other way for Asta to get back what she lost other than a literal wish. Kiri finally looked back to Asta. Hey, buddy, Asta, buddy, friend. At worst, provided everything's what it says it is, it'll be great practice. And, like interdimensional networking, that can't not be useful, right? Apparently, we just gotta accept the invitation from this cute little guy here, and we just gotta find some dudes for a wish. Well, that's definitely a weird red flag and way too convenient. I'm sure it'll be fine even if things go wrong. Not like that we're used to things, weird, difficult situations, you know? Kiri, dost thou hear thyself speak? Asta grumbled, met only with an excited grin from Kiri. Thou dost not care. Thou dost not care, though, like usual. Thine hubris is confounding, even by mine own standards. He sighed, creakily rising from the ground. Knowest, then, that I blame thou entirely for when, not if, this endeavor becomes one of thine aforementioned weird, difficult situations. Yeah, acknowledged, buddy, she shot back with a fist pump. Jumping up from her chair rock with unsettling enthusiasm, she shouts, Let's fucking go, little guy. We accept the invite. Another yap, and the screen further expanded to the size of a door, the images within blending and fading to a gentle white light, while the letter in her hand reconfigured itself to reassemble an amulet depicting Azta's old holy symbol. Nearby, the machine's own screen, like obsidian face, was flashing with all manner of what at first glance looked like snippets of code. Staring raptly at the new rift in reality before him. I do believe I can copy the coordinates of wherever this will take the two of you. Addressing the fox, he asks, I'll catch up later, if that's all right. Getting a nod in return. Now, you two. You've your things, correct? The letter implied you would be accommodated, so I wouldn't overpack too much. Curie cut him off with an abrupt, "Bro, we're good. It'll be fine." Picking her halberd up yet again, she motioned for Asta to go in first. "After you, Sir Clankington. We both know full well when this form... We both know full well this form is thine own design, Curiata." Not wasting a mote of wit on her jab and bemusedly stepping through the door, clearly wanting to get this all over with. Bouncing on her feet in excitement, Curie hops in after, followed by the fox, the door then shimmering out of existence. The hero looked on in concern with an awkward smile, trying to figure out how to explain to others who were still asleep with what had just happened. "They could have at least said bye, you know," she said. She sighed as the dawn finally crested the horizon. The machine's teleportation services had given Curie enough practice with not losing her lunch during the trips. The machine's teleportation services had given Curie enough practice with not losing her lunch during the trips, and this particular portal was much... She didn't have a way to describe it other than smoother than his. More practiced? Gentler, maybe. It was almost refreshing by comparison. She took a deep, exploratory breath, taking in her new environment. Crisp, rural air, for sure. The scent of salt on the breeze. A primal excitement had overtaken her good sense, and tucking the letter-turned old charm in her pocket, she sprinted off through the beach they'd been dropped off at, sand crunching beneath her boots as she headed towards what sounded like a town in the distance. Asta had noticed that the fox messenger was nowhere to be found, but not before Curie took off, full of adrenaline and wanderlust. Another sigh, this one deep and primordial, carrying the exhaustion of eternity, leveling himself out before slowly, tiredly following after her. Of his few remaining powers, he initially considered knowing where his sole remaining priestess was at all times, a boon. Of his few remaining powers, he initially considered knowing where his sole remaining priestess was at all times a boon. But this current mortal state quickly introduced him to the very human feeling of anxiety instead. "The machine mentioned accommodations," he reassured himself, figuring Curie wasn't immediately going to find trouble, if this was all it claimed to be. He followed the link to her to a bar, of course. Of course. She'd bypassed this... A bar, of course. Of course. She'd bypassed the city and ran all the way to the middle of wherever this was, managing to, like always, find a bar. Entering, he found her already chatting up the bartender, a woman that nearly rivaled even his own size, and likely even physically stronger. Their link being two-way, Curie looks over to Asta as he steps in, motioning him over. Asta! Asta! She's so cool! Y'all have the same teeth! She exclaims, too excited to remember any form of politeness. Suddenly, extremely self-conscious of his metallic tusks being addressed from across a building, Asta sheepishly joins Curie at the bar, very much wishing he weren't so huge, or at least blended in better. Good him. Human anxiety was the actual worst. Behind the bar, busy with a shaker mixing a drink for another patron, the tender snorted a dry laugh at Asta's reaction. A practiced fluid motion had the shaker's contents poured and slid down to the customer, taking Asta off guard. He expected that kind of dexterity from someone maybe half her size. The snort had upgraded to a full guffaw at that. "You drink, big guy?" Rejoining reality from the anxiety dimension, he stammered. Not normally, no. I find partaking in intoxicants quite vexing." The bartender looked at Curie incredulously. "He just talks like that?" Curie's face, more than a little flushed, as to having taken his sweet time catching up and leaving her to his own devices, lit up, and she responded with the scent of a necromancer on her breath. "He does all the time. I'm pretty sure it's a bit..." Words tripping over themselves in a blissful fog. She shrugs at Asta. "Oh, hold up. He
He does all of the time. I'm pretty sure it's a bit. Words tripping over themselves in a blissful fog. I'm in a bit of a fog right now, I'm sorry. She shrugs at Asta. Suit yourself then. Your friend here's quite the character. More fun than you, at least. Looking at Kiri briefly. Asked what she wanted. Her immediate request was absinthe. But no. Asked what she wanted. Her immediate request was absinthe. Because she said, and I quote, I ain't drinking none of that pushy shit, which I took as a challenge. Good thing you're here for fighting and not drinking, huh? Said that already, did she? Oh, nah, it's easier for folks here to pick up on. Not a whole lot of reasons we get new faces, and definitely not ones that carry around martial weaponry like her. Anyway, there's an inn nearby that caters to competitors. I suggest you get your impressive friend here to a bed and rest up before everything starts up. A look of determination crossed Kiri's face, mumbling, I am impressive, as to Max. She held out a hand expectantly, waiting, but instead wound up with her polearm shunted off into Asta's micropocket dimension and being picked up by her very rude partner. Nope. No, that is incorrect. Nope. No, that is incorrect. That is not what I said. Drunkenly doing her best impression of undersea kelp in his arms. The bartender grinned, stifling another laugh. Sake, by the way, and that direction. Sake, by the way, and that direction. She pointed before getting back to her shakerly duties. I'm honestly surprised she's still conscious, she adds to herself. Asta nodded. Appreciated, ma'am. Heading outside with his wiggly charge, scanning the buildings and signposts around, he eventually bumblefucked his way to the inn, getting himself and Kiri squared away as lodgings went, and getting her mercifully now relaxed self to bed. It was a futon, which she was conscious enough to bitch about, used to cushy Western-style beds in hotels. But it was comfortable enough that she was out like a light right after, the fatigue of having run halfway across a small province probably finally catching up to her. Another sigh before settling himself in to make sure she didn't throw up in her sleep or whatever else could go wrong in their first night in another reality. But from what he could tell, all he could think was, this is going to be a disaster. Bleh.
I'm so sorry.
Do not apologize. Don't apologize. I liked this entry a lot.
Is that it?
Yes, that is the audition. I am going to do a quick break to fill up my water.
It only came in at the end, but I did the personality of the characters when they were talking.
Yes, I like the word bumblefucked.
Bumblefuck is my favorite word, and more people should use it. But no, I'm so sorry for the
Don't
brain
apologize.
fog inducing. Well, it's mostly I know where I fucked up, so I'm totally planning on going back through and writing a version of this that's not something I whipped together in 4 hours on nothing but coffee.
Hey, you're
It's
fine.
fun to do it.
It's a fun audition. OCTs aren't meant for your best work ever. You are given the better part of a week to plan things out. So it's no, you did this and it was fun and it was fantastic and I loved it.
Yeah, I had fun writing it. I still want to make a better version of it because I'm a competitive motherfucker.
Yeah, if you're obsessed with grammar like me because it's fun, then it's good practice.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not necessarily like grammar. If you go back and read the actual thing, there's a few things that I nearly gave one of my editor friends a stroke because I intentionally just break a few common sense rules.
Oh, your prose is brain damaging. Oh, sorry, that's I use that term on myself sometimes.
It's fun.
But
right?
I get what you mean.
I one thing that I'm definitely going to go through is make sure all of the tense is in past tense because haha.
It happens.
Yeah.
BRB, gonna get water.
I saw that edit.
I think I made it worse. Hold on. Okay, bear.
Well, like if it's to be like holding
Okay, no,
something,
it's right. It's
it'd be
right.
bear, yeah, BEAR, yeah.
We bears.
I love that show. I loved that show. When I was like what, fucking 15. Mm-hmm.
It's a charming little show.
It is. But it's still going.
Okay, we are going to be looking for Goat's audition next. There it is. Hello?
I was actually curious on whether or not it'd be possible if I could read it myself.
Sure, go for it.
Okay.
Lord knows I need a brief
yeah,
break.
I mean, I know how the characters work. It's mainly women in the cast, and I don't know. I'd like to practice because I also do voice acting.
Yeah,
so.
go for it. Totally.
Just give me a sec to get set up just a bit more, okay?
Okay, cool. In that case,
I'll be
I'm just
putting
gonna go over their profiles and get a feel for them, get a vibe, to see how cool they are. Ooh, we got a lot of lore. I like lore. I want to read it. Oh, goodness gracious. I need to plug in my phone. It is about to collapse. Five 93 pounds. Then she decks you in the schnoz.
Wow.
Wow.
Hey,
Hello.
Hey.
I'm back, and the tornado warning got lifted, so
Oh, you were under
Oh,
tornado
that's
warning?
what happened. Oh no.
Yes, I'm sorry. I left a message in the chat about
Yeah.
that.
It got
It-
even.
Oh
Sorry.
dear. I'm glad you're all right.
Yeah.
No worries, no worries.
Take that.
there's a
nature.
particular kind of fearlessness people that live in tornado-prone areas get. It's like, because are you gonna like, what are you gonna do about a tornado? Are you gonna tell it to fuck off? No, you just kind of like just deal with it. It's like, oh, tornado warning, cool. Into the tub I go.
Yeah, we do the drills. We go through this. Stay away from the glass windows.
Yup.
It's about the usual process is that you'd expect.
You have a storm shelter?
No, just the basement.
That's good enough.
I don't have it. I don't have a basement. I kind of wish I do.
Do you have a tub?
A bathtub?
Yeah.
Close enough. Yeah, I have that. I have one.
Okay, then you should be fine if it ever happens.
Hello?
Huh.
Hi. Okay, I'll begin then.
Okay, I'll go ahead and mute myself while you read, so as not to interrupt.
Alright, good luck, God.
I don't need it. I've got skill, Sponge. You know this.
You got this.
Chapter 1. An invitation, a plan, a sword hand, and a very tired cat girl. Narasa briskly fucked up right on the first word. Oh my god, we're off to a great start. Narasa briskly walked into the sliding doors of the massive main building of Life Tech, pulling her heavy white trench coat close around her gray fur. She shot a friendly but lifeless smile to the receptionist while showing off her VIP badge. Pacing through the gaudily decorated receptional as her muddy boots thudded against the ornate floor, she made her way to the elevator. As she did, she absent-mindedly began trying to comb straight her constantly messy light gray hair with her hand. Seeing that there were no other people waiting for the elevator, she breathed an internal sigh of relief. After what had happened earlier that day, the ride up in solitude was sorely needed. The elevator doors opened, several people walked out, and Narasa walked in, waited for the doors to close, and slammed her fist into the wall, the prosthetic of one of her two metal arms causing a sharp clang. The cat girl breathed in and out, composing herself before pressing the top button of the elevator using the passcode Gloria had given her to bypass the security lock. With that finished, Narasa finally slumped to the floor, staring at the ceiling. The elevator began its slow ascent up the many floors of the building. At the center of the city of Visalia, the head Life Tech offices towered over all, just as Life Tech lorded over the city in law. Narasa breathed in and out slowly, trying to keep calm despite the dread building inside of her. The actions she had taken over the last month had set on a course of downward spiraling mutual destruction of those who had wronged her, but recent revelations had forced a change. Change was always something Narasa had difficulty adapting to. It wasn't that she was afraid of change, she told herself, just that it was so difficult to adapt to it. The elevator opened and she began briskly walking towards her office, her heartbeat far outspeeding her footfalls. It had been only a week since she'd made the Faustian bargain that had secured a high-ranking position in the most powerful corporation in the city. A corporation so powerful it was the government of this wretched city. But she spent the first 2 nights after that fateful deal memorizing the layout of the entire building in the event of things going awry. Narasa reached her office, and as quickly as she could, she swiped her keycard and entered her office, closing the door behind her. The office was sparse. Narasa didn't have much. She needed to move from her apartment to here. But with the events of the week, Narasa nervously chewed her inside her mouth, her brain frantically trying to figure out what to do next. What she didn't expect was for her eyes to meet with the piercing gaze of a small white fox with red accents and a tail that flicked back and forth with grace. Narasa quickly drew a silenced pistol from her coat and pointed it unsteadily at the creature, but in the flash of her movement, the fox had disappeared, leaving a single letter in its place. Cautiously, Narasa approached the table, her gun still raised and her hair still on end. With soft, cautious steps, she reached one hand towards the envelope. As she carefully scans her surroundings for any clue to where the fox had disappeared to, she gently picks up the letter. Making one last look around the office, she reholsters her gun, collapsing into her office chair. It wasn't her first time seeing a letter. She had personally delivered several in the past in order to get around data monitoring, but they were still a rarity. She turned it over in her hand, examining it, trying to determine who would think to send something like this, and why'd go to the trouble of employing whatever that fox thing was. She reached over and turned on a lamp at her desk and held the envelope up to it, trying to determine what might lay inside before breaking the crimson wax seal on the outside. All she saw was a single slip of paper illuminated in silhouette against the light. With curiosity finally getting the better of her, Narasa cracked open the seal of the envelope and dumped the piece of paper out onto the surface of her desk. It was blank. Narasa stared in confusion. Without thinking, she reached out and began to turn the paper over to see if there was something on the other side. However, the instant her finger touched the paper, she felt an iciness run up through her legs to her spine, jolting her in her seat in a panic. The envelope was magic, and it was a new magic to her. Different from the magic she felt burning inside her like an active volcano. Different from the sterile feel of Life Tech Magitech. Different from the emotional barrage she felt the one time she interacted with a Naga magic. And wholly different from the wrenching wrongness of Eidolon magic. Using a pencil, Narasa cautiously reached out and flipped the envelope over, revealing the writing on it. Narasa looked in simple shock at the letter, reading the declaration on it. It was an invitation to a tournament, one in another dimension that promised a wish to the winner. Narasa wanted to chalk it up as some sick joke, but the magic that crackled through the envelope gave her pause. The tapping of high heels came from behind Narasa, and a sultry and commanding voice pierced through the air. "Oh, how did parley with my upstart daughter go?" Narasa looked up to see the CEO of LifeTech, Gloria, standing tall in an extravagant purple and silver ball gown. Her elegant yet imposing form took up every room she was in, despite being quite thin herself. "Gloria, I don't know what you're talking about," Narasa lied, still lost in thought about the letter. "Oh, Narasa, I know it's hard to break a habit, especially for you given how much this office reeks of smoke. But don't lie this time. You might have been quite something in your information acquiring days in the slums, but I've had 30 years of dealing with corporate espionage and even worse, office politics. So you can tell me the truth, or I can have enforcers beat it out of you. And I much prefer my employees to be able to walk. So talk," Gloria said in a disappointed tone as she strutted over to Narasa's desk. Narasa shook herself out of shock and replied, "I tried to reach out to Bertha, but she didn't believe me." Narasa shot a glare out the window of the office, with venom dripping from each word. She continued, "They said that the verdant Avengers don't seek the destruction of this city. Somehow, she still believes they aren't just the Eidolons in a new coat of paint. Foolishly believes that all they want is to bring down Life Tech." "But Life Tech is the city," Gloria said with concern. Narasa continued, "She's loyal to Rose, meaning that, as usual, we can't rely on her. 10 years ago, she stood against those Eidolons with me. Now 10 years later, she's thrown in with those monsters. Damn the consequences." "Because that Eidolon Rose has somehow convinced her that she's a reincarnation of Alice," Narasa thought to herself with bitter anger, her hands clenching the chair's arms tightly. Gloria sighed, putting her hand to her forehead in frustration. "And what of the other? Hunter, you said their name was?" Narasa felt a pang in her chest as she thought back on the conversation she had had with Hunter after Bertha had left. Her cheeks still stung a little. "He was a no-show. He's either off the grid with the Resistance, or has made some attempt to brave the bio-wastes. Whichever it is, they won't be of help either. We'll deal with them in time once the Eidolons are sealed away again." "How disappointing." Gloria walked over to the ashtray on Narasa's deck and put her own cigarette out in the full ashtray. She glanced down at the letter on the table. "Narasa, what is that? I don't recognize the language on it." Narasa made a note of that statement, as it was perfectly legible to her. "It might be the solution to our common Eidolon problem. It's a tournament, and it offers the winner of it a wish." "Oh, so it's some childish prank. Really, Narasa, I thought you were smarter than—" Gloria trailed off as she stared in awe at the desk. Narasa was holding the letter. It was sparking red in her hand with whipping winds erupting from it. The magic condensed in the letter was being released, beginning to create a strange, misty portal in front of her desk. Quickly, before the portal could fully form, Narasa drops the letter. "Magic," Gloria said greedily. "And that will lead me to the crossroads, where I can win the tournament and that wish, Narasa said, looking at the letter with determination. Well, it all seems quite simple then. We assemble our top-end forces and whatever the military divisions will spare, grab as many fun little creations as we can from R&D, and storm the crossroads to make the wish ours, Gloria said confidently, clapping her hands together in satisfaction. Narasa thought carefully on her next words. I would advise you against that, Gloria. Gloria raises an eyebrow. Really now? You would advise me, Narasa? She smiled viciously at Narasa. You really need to keep in mind your place here, she continued, stifling a laugh. Narasa pushed on. The logistics of it just won't work out in our favor. An all-out assault could force the creator of the crossroads into hiding, meaning we're shit out of luck at getting that wish. We don't have much time, and this could waste what little we do have. We also have no ideas of the defensive capabilities they might have. There could very well be magic there that we're unprepared to handle. The Iron Hand War showed us just what happened when technology crashed unprepared against Life Tech's Magitech supremacy. We don't want to be repeating our enemy's mistakes. Furthermore, and I know you would never admit it, but Life Tech is still weak from the aftermath of that costly war with the Iron Hands. Magitech supplies are low, magic as a whole is rarer than ever, and civilian unrest is at an all-time high. Even before joining you as task matter leading the Anti-Verdant Rangers Division, and getting my hands on a lot more of your info, I found it curious just how even fights between Life Tech and domestic insurgents had been, Narasa said, matching Gloria's piercing gaze. And now with the info at hand, I know just how stretched thin we are. Your point, Gloria demanded bitterly. We can't fight on a third front right now. The guerrilla warfare in the city is already taxing our resources as is. Plus, we still don't know what threats remain within Life Tech. We only just barely stopped Gale's blood magic ritual in time. Who knows what opportunistic up-and-comer is trying to take you down next? And that's not even accounting for just how bad things will get when the Eidolons step up their game. You need to focus on taking down the Verdant Avengers before they can grow beyond just the 4 Eidolons they have now. I see your point, Gloria said begrudgingly, but that still does leave the question of how we handle this bizarre invitation. I've been thinking, and I believe I have a plan, Narasa said, leaning forward and steepling her fingers. You always do, Gloria said with sincerity. My plan is to enter the tournament, and I will win this wish. With it, I could seal the Eidolons away again. That's certainly a wish you could make, but you only just recently got your magic back. You may have beaten Gale, but... Are you sure you can handle a tournament? Your magical form is still so... volatile. Gloria sighed. Narasa continued. I believe that with the right knowledge and the right plan, I could beat whatever contestant comes my way. And who knows? Unlike Bertha, some of them may listen to reason and forfeit of their own volition for the sake of this city, Narasa countered. That's all well and good, not to mention rather optimistic, especially coming from you of all people. Gloria put her hand down on the desk and leaned in close. I, however, don't share that optimism. I'm not going to let you go alone, and frankly, I'm not sure you should be going at all. Your fight is here against the Eidolons. You said as much when you left me alone in my chambers last night. Narasa ignored that barbed reminder. The invitation was addressed to me, as much as I'd rather send someone with more recent combat experience in my stead. I'm the one who's been asked to compete. Besides, I work much better alone. There's much less you have to plan for that way, Narasa reasoned. Gloria tutted, jabbing a finger into Narasa's chest. Yes, but you're a company woman now, and as your boss, I say that if you are going, then you're not going alone. Narasa thought quickly, deciding to placate Gloria. The tournament does allow a competitor to enter as a team of 2. One extra factor isn't that much to plan around, and in some cases could prove very beneficial. So, who do you have in mind? Gloria moved a finger from Narasa's chest in a pensive pose. I'll admit I'm still not sure about that. That rider, Xavier, is one of our best enforcers, but with the history between the two of you, he's more likely to be a hindrance than a help. Knowing how your brain works, the best I can do is send you the files of our top enforcers. Let you figure out who would be best fit for you and your plans. Though I'll still have a few recommendations of my own. Gloria pulls out her phone, diverting her attention to it. You should have them on your laptop within the hour. So pull yourself together and get to work. Gloria looks up from the message she was drafting on her phone and gives Narasa a knowing look. And no more tantrums in the elevator. It's so unsightly of you. With that closing remark, Gloria turned on her heel and walked out of Narasa's office. Just taking a break for some water.
Respect.
Narasa spent the next 3 hours absorbing a non-stop stream of information. Names, abilities, kill counts. She set aside a few names that could prove useful to her, none of which were Gloria's recommendations. Suddenly she stopped, intrigued by the video now playing on her laptop screen. She closed the laptop, thought for a minute, then picked up the phone and placed a call. "Oh, it's Gloria's plaything!" came the gruff and boisterous voice of Cran, commander of the enforcers. Narasa internally sighed. I assure you, sir, the salacious rumors about Gloria and I are just that. Rumors. I have been brought on as a taskmaster for dealing with the Verdant Avengers because of my skill, experience, and knowledge of the team's members. You have done well in combating them, and I'm reaching out because I do need your help still. I can't keep winning the fight against them without your aid, Narasa said carefully, ignoring the barbed comment. Cran laughed. Gloria said you were smart, and I didn't believe it. But she tends to be wrong, and I shouldn't judge you too harshly for her mistakes. What can I do you for? Narasa smiled to herself from her end of the phone. I'm putting together a team of the top enforcers to serve as my strike team. Gloria gave me a list of her recommendations, but I found most lacking, and all of them loyal to her. I feel the only way we can have a truly synergistic strike team is to have a wider portfolio. Since you are such an expert on them, I wanted your recommendations, as well as a few questions answers about some that had caught my eye. Narasa could practically hear Cran puffing his chest in pride. Oh, I assure you my enforcers are the best of the best. I can send over much better options than Gloria's lackeys. She only ever sees things through her pristine windows in her office up there. I'm the real head of this. I've spent so much time in the streets and the trenches. He gloats from behind his desk. What questions do you need answered? Well, sir, there's this sniper named Lark. His portfolio lists one of his achievements being his quarterfinal placement in an intra-enforcer tournament from 4 years ago. However, I checked the records, sir, and it seems 4 years ago the annual tournament was skipped. Which I find strange, given that Lark's profile comes with an embedded video of the tournament. I was interested in him as a potential scout, but if he's a liar, then I worry about the effect that could have on my team. The line went silent for a bit. Lark, the old man said with an exasperated sigh. Well, at least evidence only popped up after the operation was over. That could have made shit go AWOL, Cran said, returning to his boisterous attitude from before. Pardon me, sir, said Narasa leadingly. Lark's not a liar, miss. Careless, perhaps, as that video should have been deleted. He's a good kid and a great shot, but despite having a great eye, he can miss the details. Still would recommend wholeheartedly. I will take that into consideration. But now I'm curious, sir, about this successful operation you performed and why you might need to cover up that intra-enforcers tournament. Well, you see, there was this one enforcer, fresh out of the academy, with top marks. Could shoot a flea off a dog without clipping any hair at 50 paces. Expert in hand-to-hand, even while outnumbered 10 on 1. And this was without augmentation. Cran bragged. Narasa nodded along. So far so good, but one fact had caught her attention. Without? Well, how did they perform with augmentation? That's the thing, they never did, because their best skill of all involved numbers. That's not nearly as important to an enforcer, but it got me thinking. What if this talented young officer was sent undercover? They'd shown an aptitude to perform well under pressure, and even those insurgents could use a numbers guy. After all, we keep subtracting them. Cran joked, casually through the phone line while Narasa's face held still. Cran continued. So before Quentin could gotten any record of them publicly as an enforcer, we set them up to go undercover. 2 years later, and we had enough info to wipe out that resistance cell almost completely. Sadly, it cost Quentin their life. They were MIA during completion of the job, and given the only half-finished last report before that, we think they were found out at the last minute, and died ensuring whatever information they had got to us. Cran gave a failed attempt at sincerity, but his pride still shone through beneath it. Such tragic irony. Narasa paused, considering what she knew. What a tragic sacrifice for a truly noble cause. It's a shame they aren't still around. They would have been a great asset to my strike team. The best die young, the old general said. You're truly wise beyond your years. I understand that for security reasons you can't make their file public, but I would like to see if any trace does remain. Would like to read it over and honor their memory, said Narasa, pressing her luck. But her luck held firm as Cran responded eagerly. Of course! I can send it right on over along with any recommendations for your strike team. I even have footage of the finalist match. Quentin could really fight like no other. Thank you very much for your time. LifeTech will be a better company because of this, Narasa said, beginning to hang up right before Cran began speaking for one final time. No, thank you. They're such fun to talk to. Call me anytime. Oh, and when you've got those Verdant Avengers by the balls, make sure you let me know so I can be there to crush them. One sec while I drink some water. Narasa closed up her laptop and put her head in her hands, collecting her thoughts. It had been another few hours of Narasa perusing the remaining enforcer files, but her mind was made up on who she was planning to pick, and she began packing up her things, ready to take the next step when Gloria walked back into her office. She stepped up to Narasa's desk and placed a small red stone on it. A Naga bloodstone? Narasa said in genuine disbelief. Narasa could feel the magic radiating out from it. It hurt to look at. Yes, while we can't send a tank through this portal, we can put the power of one in your pocket, Gloria said matter-of-factly. This will be of good use, Narasa said, holding back the shake in her voice. Sadly, it's just an old one. Due to a supply chain shortage, these things are quite rare. R&D would only spare this one, and unfortunately, it's almost all used up. I could imagine only being able to get one grand use out of it. Frustration tinged Gloria's voice as she said this. I was always under the impression they were only single use. At first, yes, but after experimentation, we did find ways to make this product much more effective. But by that time, the Naga had gone into hiding, so getting fresh ones was a lot harder. Plus, by that time, Joffrey wanted to begin work on his pet project, the Eternity Machine. So the company had to go and waste a couple $100 million on that blunder. Gloria let out an exasperated sigh. Really, I'm quite glad my daughter killed him. All truth be told, I had gotten tired of fighting him over funding. Narasa took the stone in her hand, the dark red teardrop of it weighing in her hand with the weight of the world. The arcane energy radiated throughout her body, piercing her skin and making her breath run short. Narasa quickly slipped the stone into her jacket pocket and tried to collect herself. Gloria turned and walked out of the room saying, "That's all I needed. I look forward to meeting with you tomorrow to assess your enforcer choices." It was later that night. Narasa was now in a less than stellar apartment complex standing outside the door of her quarry. She raised her hand and with a rap-tap-tap knocked on Quentin's door. "I'll be there shortly," came a soft yet deep voice from inside with just a tint of edge to it. After a minute, the door opened and Narsa got a good look at Quentin. They stood tall, nearly a foot taller than Narasa's 5'5", and had let their dark red hair grow long since the footage Narasa had seen of them. They wore thin rectangle-frame glasses on a sharp face with piercing brown eyes. They were dressed semi-formally in a tan dress shirt and black slacks with a tie that, Narasa could tell from its looseness, had hurriedly been put on before answering the door. "Ah, you're Mr. Floyne Hart, is that correct?" Narasa inquired. "That's my name. What do you want?" Quentin responded. Narasa watched them closely as they said that, then gave a simple smile. "I was told that you will do odd jobs, manual labor in particular. Is that correct?" "If you need it lifted, I'm quite gifted. How can I help you?" Quentin said, and Narasa noticed the tension in her voice and body release just a bit. "You can invite me in so we can discuss the finer points of this job, so I can decide if you are the right fit." Quentin opened the door wider and gestured for Narasa to come in while saying, "Copy that. I'm just making some tea. It wouldn't be too hard to pour you a cup as well, assuming you like green." Narasa entered the studio apartment and looked around. A simple mat on the floor for sleeping, a small collection of cacti on the kitchen table, and a sofa that held a small stack of books on the close end and a coffee table in front of it. All in all, a minimalistic and well-maintained living space. "Green tea would be wonderful. May I sit on this couch? I have some paperwork here I want to lay out, and the table in front of this couch is a bit less cluttered than the kitchen table," Narasa said, moving to the couch, noticing that on the other end was a small television that seemed to need repairs. Quentin looked up from pouring the second cup of tea. "Oh, I could clear it for you if you'd like." No, the couch is fine. Whatever you want, ma'am." Narasa sat down and placed the manila folder down on the table, but still kept the tablet she was holding close to her chest. "So, I've heard you have dockside experience." "Yes, ma'am. My parents were fishermen, so I was born and raised on the seaside part of the city. Still working there now, just like to have a bit of extra work on the side. Makes the ends easier to meet." Quentin brought over the 2 cups of tea and set them down on the coffee table before sitting down on their knees. "Yes, I am aware of your skills." "So you're well aware of what I'm capable of, then?" "Oh, quite. If you know about me, I should know about you." Quentin blew on their tea a little, it being a bit too hot for them still. "My name is..." Narasa paused for the briefest of seconds, considering her options. Narasa swept snow." She took a sip from her tea and placed the tablet on the table and spun it around for Quentin to see the video. "Before I continue this interview, I do want to make one thing certain. The person fighting in this video is you, correct?" The temperature in the room rose as in a flash of fire a sword was now inches away from Narasa's throat. "I'm going to need you to stop and tell me what you really want right now." Quentin practically growled at Narasa, all hospitality replaced by lividity laced with fear. Narasa spoke slowly. "I have already explained to you what I want. I want to hire you. I never specified what kind of job it would be, but I mean you no harm. Quentin." Quentin tensed up at hearing their name, then moved the sword even closer to Narasa's throat, the hairs on her neck touching the cold steel. But Narasa stayed cooler. "Quentin, I haven't been lying. My name is Narasa Sweptsnow, I am here about a job, and I believe you would be quite good at it." "Get to the point," Quentin said while pointing the sword at Narasa. Narasa explained the tournament, explained that she was needing an additional member to help her, and explained that this tournament would be a wonderful opportunity to get back in with the good graces of Life Tech. Quentin lowered their sword, but didn't sheath it. "A tournament. I've fought in several before and won all but one of those," Quentin said, a hint of pride in their voice. It's that combination of skill and experience that's why I've come to you. Plus, this opportunity to get back in good graces with Life Tech won't come again, Narasa said warmly. Quentin looked up at Narasa and smiled. Fine. Sounds like a good idea. Consider me invested. Wonderful, said Narasa, watching Quentin carefully as she continued. Don't pack light. The tournament gave no clue as to how long it will take, and it is always better to be over-prepared. We will be leaving here for Life Tech at 6 a.m. sharp. Yeah, Quentin said simply. Sounds like a plan. Narasa stood up and lightly brushed her jacket. I'll see you soon then, Quentin, but for now I will see myself out. Narasa closed Quentin's door behind her. She put her ear to the door, and as she expected, she heard the sound of frantic packing through it. Turning on her foot, she bolted for the door at the end of the hall. She yanked it open and practically leapt down the stairwell behind the door. She stumbled a bit as she opened the door to the floor below, but caught herself and continued the sprint down the hall. She skidded to a stop in front of the door to her own apartment and barreled through it in her messy room to the fire escape. She clambered through the window and then caught her breath, the burning in her lungs almost feeling like a buildup of blood in her throat. She desperately ached for a cigarette, as this was the usual place she smoked, and the muscle memory of the place was eating at her, but she pushed the cravings down. She wanted to keep up the professional appearance she had maintained in Quentin's room for when they tried making their escape down the fire escape stairs. Only a few minutes later, and Narasa's expectations were met as Quentin exited their apartment onto the fire escape. They turned and began making their way down the stairs, only to be met with Narasa's piercing gaze. Quentin stopped and stared back, stunned that Narasa had somehow seemingly teleported in the path of their escape. Please come down here, Quentin. I'd rather not have to yell up at you, Narasa lightly yelled up to Quentin. Quentin gripped the railing of the stairs down to where Narasa stood patiently. The metal of the railing began to glow red as fire began to flicker out from the gripped hand. Narasa took a breath to steel her nerves and stepped forward, but noticed that it seemed Quentin was doing something similar. Quentin exhaled. How did you know I'd run? That I wouldn't just cut you down when you turned your back? Narasa tilted her head and shot a glance over to Quentin's hand. The fire had subsided. To answer the latter first, I knew you wouldn't kill me because I know you haven't killed anyone. You don't know that, Quentin said, turning their head from Narasa in what seemed like shame. Narasa took a few steps up the stairs of the fire escape. Your enforcer profile, once I recovered it, showed no deaths on your record. From what research I did, that didn't change when you were undercover. It did, Quentin said, the softness of their voice now hardened. And yet here I stand, fur uncut. You're a dangerous person, Quentin, but not a danger to me. If you listen to and trust me, I will not be a danger to you. I've offered you a carrot above in your room, and now I could threaten with a stick, but... well, I haven't yet told you what the wish would be for. There is a threat returning to the city, one I'm certain you know too well. Life Tech has information that... Narasa paused, considered, then continued the course. The Iron Hands are returning, and with them they will bring untold death upon this city. Quentin took a step back, the drop of fear that had been present in this conversation now drenching their face before contorting back to anger. But before Quentin could speak, Narasa took control of the pace of the conversation. I am aware that your parents were killed during the final months of the first, and hopefully only, Iron Hands War, when civilian casualties were highest. You enrolled in the academy with hopes of being a soldier to fight in the... I'm stopping you there, Quentin said, their voice cold. I don't need you assuming any more things about my past. You do not seem a dishonest person. You seem to be a woman just trying to help and do the right thing. I have often wondered what the right thing to do means to me, and the uncertainty of that answer has turned me into a coward. So why me? I was good, great even in my fields, but I wasn't the only one. So why me of all people? Narasa simply tilted her hand and responded truthfully. All the other enforcers have their own various company loyalties. I need someone who I know will be loyal to me. Quentin kept her gaze averted from Narasa. I ran the first second I could. How can you expect me to be loyal to you? Narasa took a step forwards towards Quentin, finally climbing the last of the stairs and tentatively placed her hand on Quentin's shoulder. It's a more effective gamble than any of the other enforcers. And before you say another word, let me show you how I knew you were here. Narasa points at the window she was standing by. This is my apartment. The only reason I found you was through the most dangerous aspect of life. Pure dumb luck. Quentin's face breaks out into a relieved smile. Fate truly weaves its threads in mysterious ways. How observant. Your place is a mess, Quentin also observed. Narasa smiled, satisfied with how the pieces had fallen together. Don't pack light. The tournament gave no clue as to how long it will take, and it is always better to be over-prepared. We will be leaving here for Life Tech at 6 a.m. sharp, Narasa said, as she began shooing Quentin out of her room. I still have resources I need to acquire for the tournament. Quentin tilted her head and gave a slight smirk. Copy that, Narasa. It was the next morning. Narasa raised her hand to Quentin's door, the sleep deprivation weighing on her shoulders. She had been up all night, too stressed to sleep and too busy thinking to even recognize that she was too stressed to sleep. Pushing past the growing weight on her eyelids, she knocked on Quentin's door, and with barely a past moment, they answered. What the? Sorry, something's been deleted from it. Let me just... Sorry, one of the lines got deleted, so I just had to quickly replace it. Sorry for the early rising, but we need to be going as soon as possible. Narasa, I work with fishermen. Needing to be out the door at 6 a.m. means I was able to sleep in today. And now you once again work for the company. Do you have everything ready? Of course, Quentin said, putting up 2 large-sized paper grocery bags. Any ports in a storm, I see? I am quite experienced with ports, Quentin said with a shrug and a smile. If we have time, I can grab a military bag for you like mine, though it's down in the car right now. Yeah, that would be nice to bag something better, Quentin said with a wry shrug as the two began making their way out of the apartment complex. Thankfully, I already had these mostly packed because of yesterday. Sorry for running out that first time. Realized I hadn't said that and wanted to. It was weighing on my mind last night after you left. Thank you. It's good to hear, but actions are louder than words, and you not running means more than just the words. One sec while I get some water. The two walked outside to an old beat-up car. Narasa clicked a key fob, opening up the back trunk. As she walked around to the driver's side, she said, You can put your things in the back with my bag. There should be room. But Quentin shook their head. Thank you kindly, but I'd rather hold on to my things in the car. Narasa raised an eyebrow as she got into the car and started the engine. If that's what makes you comfortable, just figure that with your height you'd want the extra space. Quentin smiled and, while precariously holding their 2 bags in one arm, opened the passage door. It's fine. I prefer sitting back here as opposed to sitting shotgun anyway. Also, I've noticed the bulk in your coat. You have a firearm on you, Quentin said in a serious tone. Narasa let out a beleaguered sigh. A rarity, I know, after the Iron Hands War, but a woman like me could never be too careful. Can I see it? Quentin said with genuine curiosity. I just said a woman like me can never be too careful. What do you think? Narasa shot back pointedly. You can tell a lot about a person by the weapon they use. It's already clear I won't hurt you, otherwise you wouldn't still be standing. I'd just like to know a bit more about the person I'm going to be spending the next who knows how long with, Quentin said, sounding a little hurt. She thought on it for a second, and with a sigh drew the gun, unloaded the magazine, and unchambered the round. She tentatively handed it over to Quentin, who then began examining it. Quentin's eyes narrowed behind their glasses as they focused in on the firearm. Small, slender frame, and you paid out extra money on the black market for a silencer as well. .380 caliber, not the best for stopping power, but still lethal. And instead of iron sights, you've gone for custom low-profile sights. A good option for quickly drawing from a purse or some other concealed location. Quentin said, mostly to himself, as Narasa remained silent, watching them carefully. This must have come at quite the cost, Quentin appraised. I knew a guy, was able to strike a deal, Narasa said shortly, holding out her free hand to retrieve her gun. Sounds like quite a story. Wouldn't mind being filled in on it at some point, Quentin said, obliging the woman as they switched their hand position to an over-the-grip one as they passed back Narasa's weapon with care. That's highly unlikely, Narasa said shortly. A shame. So, what does my weapon say about me? Narasa said expectantly. Well, there's no need for me to say it. You already know plenty about yourself. How insightful, Narasa muttered, holstering the gun and lifting the duffel bag she had placed on the ground, faltering a step with its weight. Do you need help with that? Quentin said, taking a step forward. No, I'm good. It's not that heavy, I just had a small issue with keeping my balance while picking it up, Narasa stated. Copy. Sorry for the wait up, Quentin said with a slight smile. The car ride had passed in relative silence, Quentin sitting in the back looking out the window at the passing scenery of the city. Narasa was behind the wheel, her mind cloudy from lack of sleep when Quentin spoke up. So, this crossroads. How exactly are we getting there? If it's a road trip, we should probably swap off every hour or so for driving. This is a team effort, after all. Narasa shook her head. No, we're just heading to Life Tech, where we'll take it for... Narasa was interrupted by the ear-splitting crash of metal as the life form of a woman adorned in an armor made of viney thorns crashed into the roof of the car. The wheels skidded as Narasa lost control of the wheel, the car pivoting into thankfully empty sidewalk. Narasa shook the shock out of her system and slammed on the brakes as fast as she could, just barely stopping the car from slamming into the doorway of a bakery. The woman on the hood of Narasa's car glared at Narasa with pure, unbridled malice in her eyes. Bertha told me what you did. Told me how you killed my father. I am going to return the favor and leave your weak, broken figure displayed for all the vultures of Life Tech to gaze upon. Narasa gave a cold look back. I didn't lay a finger on your father. Bertha killed him. We both know this. Narasa said, subtly moving her hand to where her pistol was holstered in her jacket. Bullshit, you liar! You told me what you did, how you tricked her into killing my father. You haven't seen her for years, and the way you contact her is with anonymous lies about my father. I am going to... Narasa drew her pistol and fired 3 times into the woman. The first shot pierced through her neck, causing her to stumble and fall from the car, but the recoil of the gun caused the other 2 shots to fly into the air, embedding in the bakery wall. Narasa, what is going on? What is that thing? Quentin said in confusion. Narasa gritted her teeth and threw the car into reverse. I could tell you her name, but it wouldn't mean shit. Magic protects her identity. It's why you can barely even tell what you're looking at. If I told you her name, that'd just float through your brain like fog. Narasa spun the steering wheel of her car, the damaged vehicle peeling out from the sidewalk and speeding through the traffic that had begun to slow down to see the vehicular carnage that had occurred. Narasa continued as old battle instincts began to kick in from her teenage years. Identity isn't the only thing her magic protects her from. That bullet hurt, but all it was good for was getting some space. You need some serious magical firepower to even think of slowing one of those monsters down. Monsters? So there's more of them? Yes. I'm hoping her blind rage means she rushed here on her own. If the others showed up, we're not making it to the tournament. Narasa opened up the glove compartment of her car and pulled a single shotgun shell from it. With one hand on the wheel, she quickly used her teeth to open up a compartment on her prosthetic arm and loaded the shotgun shell into her arm. I've only got one of these, Quentin. Nabbed it from an old job. It's infused with some sort of magic, though I've not a damned clue what it'll actually do. Quentin stared intently at Narasa. A bullet's a bullet. They've only got one purpose. Narasa spoke with a quiet ferocity. My thoughts exactly. When she catches up, and hells no she will, it's our one shot at winning this battle. Quentin shook their head. If it's magic we need, we have one other shot. They held out their hand, and in a swirl of flame, a sword materialized in their hand. This wouldn't have been in the files of me. A gift from a lover. I call it Auto Heart. Fire flickered from their hands as they spoke, and Narhasa had a look of relief wash over her face. I knew you were the path forward, she said under her breath. Suddenly, the car screeched to a halt of its own accord. Quentin and Narasa jerked in their seats and collectively spun around to see that their pursuer had caused the car to screech to a halt, using vines to constrict the car in place. Their pursuer drew a whip and began advancing on the two of them. How did she catch up so fast? Quentin exclaimed. It doesn't matter. We need to focus on getting in close enough for the plan to work. Narasa took a deep breath, then opened the door and began running towards the pursuer. Narasa weaved in towards the armored woman, raising her unloaded arm and attempted to swing a punch into the face of the pursuer, but a swift knee to the gut left Narasa winded and bent over double on the floor. An armored gauntlet reached down and wrapped its fingers around Narasa's throat. You ruined everything! Your petty entitlement will be the death of you and be a release for all the pain you've caused me! The hand on Narasa's neck tightened. Narasa could feel the thorns of the gauntlet piercing into her neck as she fought for breath. Narasa felt blood pooling up in her mouth. Her ribs ached and she could feel everything going dim. Narasa struggled to speak, gurgling out the roof. Words. Ruth, my only regret is not killing your father sooner. She raised her hand as best she could, and a blast erupted from it. The slug collided with Ruth's sternum, sending her flying back and causing Narasa to get dropped into a slump on the ground. Narasa stood shakily, and she could feel her own magic surging in her, rage building at Ruth and her father Randy. She began limping as fast as she could back to her car, where Quentin was running to meet her. She looked back over her shoulder at Ruth. The woman was writhing on the ground, the magic of the bullets seeming to be eating away at her armor. This is our chance, Quentin. Right now, we need to get to... Narasa was interrupted by Quentin rapidly pushing her to the ground and grabbing the end of the whip that Ruth had sent flying to the back of Narasa's head. Narasa looked up at Quentin as in one fluid motion they yanked the whip towards themselves, sending Ruth's unsteady footing crashing to the ground. With their sword raised, they uttered the single word, "Burn!" Before bringing the sword down onto the ground, a crescent wave of flame erupting from the strike and overtaking Ruth. Come on, Narasa! We need to get... Before Ruth's whip wrapped around Quentin's neck and pulled them to the ground, Ruth began reeling in Quentin as they began struggling to cut loose the vined whip that constricted him. Narasa stood back to her feet shakily, still catching her breath. She saw Quentin, restrained by Ruth and fighting for their life. Narasa didn't even realize that she had the Naga bloodstone in her hand. All she felt was rage. Narasa's magic erupted through her, channeled through the bloodstone's own innate power. She heard the scream of lives sacrificed for this power ringing in her ears and felt the pressure of all that magic burst out through her hand. There was a flash of lightning from Narasa and a piercing red beam ripped through Ruth, sending her hurtling to the ground. Narasa stood there, reeling from the black blast of all that magical power coursing through her. She wordlessly put the stone back in her pocket and walked over to where Quentin lay coughing. What was that? Quentin said rapidly, their face in utter shock. Narasa remained silent. Is that thing... Is it dead? I put as much as I could into it, but it barely seemed to stun it. Quentin stood shakily to their feet, looking to Narasa for answers. Narasa remained silent, walking over to where Ruth's limp body lay ragged on the ground. Blood seeped from all the wounds she had received, and the blast from the bloodstone had torn a jagged and bloody hole through her shoulder. Narasa looked down at Ruth. The armor surrounding the woman was beginning to fade away, revealing the woman beneath it. Her hair was drenched in sweat and blood, and the malice that had once been in her eyes was replaced by the vacant stare of shock. Narasa wordlessly placed her boot on the helpless woman's neck and began to press down. A decade ago, we stopped you, Eidolons. I gave everything to keep you sealed away. I don't care what new form you're in now. I will kill every single one of you again. Narasa whispered in rage to herself. She removed her boot from the lifeless corpse of Ruth and then turned to look at Quentin, who had begun walking back to the car. The rest of the drive to Life Tech passed in stony silence. They finally pulled into the garage of the Life Tech building and began gathering their things. Quentin gave Narasa a look of concern as they began walking to the elevator, but Narasa either didn't notice or didn't care. As they entered the elevator, Narasa gave a look to the camera in the corner. The elevator arrived to the top, and the two briskly walked to Narasa's office. Once I get some water.
Water.
Yeah. Yeah, I also want to do this reading because this is 32 pages. I didn't need to inflict that on anyone but myself.
Respect the lore.
As the two entered, Narasa held out her left prosthetic arm, and with the right opened a tiny compartment on it containing a keyring and a keychain of a small cartoon rabbit. Selecting a small silver key, she leaned down and opened up a small locked drawer in her desk, a piece of paper falling out from the lip of it inside as she opened it. Quentin craned their neck to look at what Narasa was doing. "Business really that cutthroat here?" Quentin asked. "I'm new. Because of how I got here, I know I'm not liked." Narasa spoke with extra emphasis as she said. "And you can never be too careful." Quentin walked forward and took the piece of paper from Narasa. "But it's just a simple scrap of paper from your notebook. Even if someone did go through your things, they could easily just..." Quentin noticed that the strange ink was turning the piece of paper red, as well as their hand. Red-handed. Clever. "It's a special type of solution. Reacts to the oils naturally found in skins. One of the benefits of these," Narasa wiggled her prosthetic fingers as she spoke. "So, does this come off anytime soon?" "Sorry, your hand's gonna be stained red for about a week. Just like that slip of paper." "I should have brought my gloves," Quentin said remorsefully. Narasa froze with a brief flash of realization, but it didn't look like the false back of this drawer had been disturbed, so she proceeded. Removing the false back, she carefully slid a brown paper parcel out and slipped it into the duffel bag. "So is that the thing that's going to portal with us to the, crossroads you said it was called?" "Yes to the name, and no to it being the portal." "And then why all the secrecy?" Narasa ignored Quentin as she withdrew an envelope from an inner pocket out of her coat. "This is what will take us to the tournament, Quentin. I just need to put on this tag in the envelope," she said, removing a small necklace and putting it in a small compartment in her right prosthetic arm. She felt a small bit of magic surge up through her arm into her back as she did. "Huh. You have a tail," Quentin said with mild shock. Narasa felt the dull pain of a long dormant grief hearing that. "No, Quentin. I lost my tail in an accident years ago," Narasa lied, leaning against the wall in exhaustion. "No, I don't mean in regards to your natural, if missing tail. I mean, well, just look behind you." Quentin gestured rather vaguely to behind themselves. Narasa turned her head over her shoulder and did in fact see a spectral white foxtail protruding from where her tail used to be. It felt strangely comforting seeing something there again after all these years. "That must be how they identify you as a competitor," Quentin surmised. Always was curious what it'd be like to have a tail, so almost sad I don't get one of my own. Narasa shot Quentin a look. "Oh, don't worry, that was just a silly little grade school thought towards the tail end of my... Oh, sorry. Oh, don't worry, that was just a silly little grade school thought towards the tail end of my adolescence." Narasa shot the look at Quentin harder. Sorry, it was right there in front of me, or rather behind." Quentin saw the look intensifying and stopped. "I'm just trying to lighten the mood a little. It's tense as hell in here." Narasa shook her head, then went to the space in her office where there was the most room. With determination, she said, "I accept." And at her words, a portal opened up, and together, Quentin and Narasa stepped through towards the crossroads. One sec while I get some more water. It was midday in the crossroads. People were milling about in the marketplace when one of the many portals that escorted competitors to the crossroads appeared. The issue was that this one appeared several feet in the air and pointing down. Quentin and Narasa spilled through. Narasa landing painfully on her side, with her supplies spilling out from her bag in the dirt, and Quentin landed gracefully on their feet. They quickly put down their own bags and went to help Narasa to her feet, but hearing footsteps approaching from behind them, turned to face them. Are you two okay? I haven't seen any of the portals do that. Quentin looked down at the messy black hair and dirty mechanic's apron of the person talking to them. The same mystical tail that had appeared on Narasa adorned this person as well, the mark of a competitor. We're fine, and I'd advise you to keep your space. The concern is appreciated, but not necessary, Quentin said curtly, their body tensing up in preparation for a fight. Narasa laid there in the dirt. The portal had stirred up all the magic she had been trying hard to keep under control. She could feel her power building up inside of her, wanting to erupt out of every pore of her skin. She slammed her fist into the ground to center herself, which got her strange looks from the citizens and a few competitors who had gathered around, and got to her feet. It took every bit of mental and physical energy she had left to push the raging ocean of magic that battered from within inside. Wincing, she looked at the competitor that Quentin was talking with and gave a fake smile. I'm sorry for Quentin's shortness. My name's Narasa, and I'm certain that we're not expected to fight the moment we arrive, Quentin, so stand down. Quentin eased up a little at this and walked over to gather up Narasa's bag. Oh, thank you for that, Quentin, Narasa said before turning back to the other competitor. Now, what was your name? Oh, it's Robbie. I'm just still surprised your portal malfunctioned like that. I wonder why that happened, Ravi said, trying to hide their growing interest in Narasa's mechanical arms. Given magic's disruptive properties on technology, the portals must actually be technological in origin, Narasa mused, feeling the weight of the Naga bloodstone in her pocket and her own magic crackling through every nerve and fiber of her body. Ravi tilted her head. Where you come from, magic might do that, but where I'm from, it's not like that at all. Which would explain why your portal malfunctioned like that. However, from what little bit of studying I've done on the fox that guided me here, I highly doubt that it's technological in origin. Ravi looked around. Speaking of, where is your fox guide? It's supposed to guide you to one of the people you need to check in with for the tournament. Narasa thought about the strange fox that she had scared off at her desk. I never saw or encountered a fox. All I received was a letter. It must be a different process for everyone, or at least one with some level of variation given circumstances, Narasa said, trying to keep as much focus on this conversation as she could and not on the pain piercing out the stumps of her arms as she fought to keep the magic controlled. Well, you can ask one of the guards around here about who you need to check in with. Can't miss them. They look very guardy, Ravi said with a shrug and a smile. Best of luck in the competition, then. Well, unless we end up fighting, but you know how it is. While Narasa was having this conversation, an aged man with a gaunt face strode over to Quentin, who had just finished putting Narasa's things back in her bag. He wore the armor of a crossguard and had a spear slung lazily over his shoulder. Hey, listen, Bubs. Seems like you've got everything taken care of here. I know how you competitor types are, so I'll just make this quick. Get your stuff out of the road and stop impeding traffic. If you need to check in, there's a bar near here called the Fox Den. You can go here and save the scene causing for the tournament. Quentin stood up straight after zipping up the bag and addressed the card. They say to fear those who grow old in a career where your life's on the line. Someone like you must be quite well versed in combat to help oversee such an event and protect the people, Quentin said, sizing up the guard. The man gave a blank look back at Quentin. Listen here! They stopped, looked Quentin up and down, but gave up. Fellow, I've only had this job because I got fired from my own construction gig. Quentin crossed their arms, the look of respect for the old man fading from their face. Oh, okay, how'd you get fired? Quentin said, trying to continue the increasingly awkward conversation. The guard matched Quentin's look of disrespect of one of his own, sprinkling in some annoyance for good measure. How'd I get fired? Hell kind of question is that? That's some personal shit. You don't just go asking crap like that. I ain't asking about you and your girlfriend's sex life, am I? Quentin shot a quick glance at Narasa at this comment, but the cat girl, having finished her conversation with Ravi, seemed to be staring off into the middle distance. That's not my girlfriend, you ass. That's my boss, Quentin said, scowling and taking a step forward. The guard rolled his eyes. Listen, I don't care. Just get a move on, okay? Quentin looked at the guard for a moment, then turned and picked up their bags. Narasa, come on. Let's move out. We can ask around to find out where we need to go from here, or something. No point in just standing here. Narasa shook herself back into focus. Yes, let's get moving. We need to check in as well as acquire a room where we can set down the bags. Speaking of, I can carry my bag, Narasa said, holding out her hand expectantly. Quentin set down their bag and passed Narasa's things to her. There's a guard back there. He's an ass, but he'll be able to tell us where to go. After receiving directions, Narasa and Quentin began walking towards the bar. After a minute, Quentin turned to Narasa and asked, Boss, are you okay? I'm good, Quentin, Narasa said through clenched teeth. Copy that, boss, Quentin said, looking back towards the horizon. Without turning back to Narasa, they continued. Just if you need to go over anything with me in regards to this mission, just let me know. Narasa turned her gaze ever so slightly to Quentin. Several different things she could say raced through her head. Narasa stayed silent, turning her focus back to the road in front of her. In time, they arrived at the Fox Den. Despite being early morning, the place was a hustle and bustle of competitors and citizens eager to see who would be competing this year. Narasa stayed quiet as they waited in line for Saki to open the doors to the bar and begin the process of checking in. The combination of the noise of the crowd and the blinding light of a sun unclouded by smog were wreaking havoc on Narasa's exhausted mind. Then there was the issue of the innate magic of the crossroads. Narasa was starting to acclimate to it more, but she could still feel it pushing against her own. She could still feel it pushing against her as her own pushed to get out. Quentin was staying close to Narasa and staying silent as well. Every so often, a citizen would approach and inquire about them and their plans for the tournament. Narasa could tell that most of these people were on some sort of business, whether a bookie figuring out what odds to give the competitors, merchants looking for customers who wouldn't know the price ranges of the towns, and the occasional person with just a genuine interest in the competition. Eventually one came by who began talking about accommodations, and before Quentin could shoo another person away, Narasa quickly slid between them and acquired a hotel room for the night, trading over one of the several sculptures she'd been gifted by Gloria for bartering with for a key to a hotel room. Not much longer than that, Saki had opened up the door and began filtering the handful of contestants who had been aimlessly milling around the entrance. Eventually, Narasa and Quentin were standing at the counter inside the bar. The bar was empty aside from one competitor ordained in what could only be described as a pirate's outfit, starting his day off with something strong. And Saki stood strong behind the counter. The Yoni was tall, with a dark red skin, and she wore a loose-fitting suit that hid her powerhouse frame. She was loosely sorting through various folders, muttering to herself. Narasa waited for Saki to finish reorganizing, looking at the collection of drinks behind Saki to pass the time. Okay, got all that sorted. Let's get you two wrapped up and then keep this moving. I still gotta make sure everything here is good before we open tonight. Tell me your name, the Yoni said calmly but quickly. Narasa swept snow, and my +1 here is Quentin Salazar, Narasa said, gesturing at Quentin, who was himself staring at the pirate drinking in the corner. I can't believe someone would be risking a hangover right before a tournament, Quentin said to himself. Saki shuffled through the paperwork until she found the file relating to Narasa and quickly scribbled in their info. Hey, plenty of competitors like to come here to socialize and relax. Can't be all uptight training and prep. You have to have some fun with life's twists and turns, Saki shrugged. Besides, I wouldn't run this place if I didn't want someone to enjoy a drink when they wanted one. Now, here's a key to your room at the Kit Inn. You can drop your things off there and then enjoy all that the Crossroads has to offer. Saki gave a look to Quentin. You should swing by here tonight when we open. We can help you loosen your tie a little. Thank you, but I wouldn't want to impede my abilities. Too much is at stake for us, Quentin said. Narasa just stared at the key that had been placed on the table, burning the picture of the salesman who had ripped them off into her mind to be dealt with later. She gave a smile to Saki as she picked up the key and then began walking out the door with Quentin. I know that we need to keep as sharp as possible for this, Quentin. But having a drink or two at the bar could be good later tonight. We need to get as much information on our fellow competitors as we possibly can. And in my experience, nowhere is as densely packed a place for information as a bar. Quentin nodded. I'm not opposed to a drink or two, but I'll be honest, I've been on edge since yesterday. Since finding out the Iron Hands are returning makes it hard to just relax when this is our best chance at stopping them. Narasa thought about her own sleepless night, one of many since she had realized the Eidolons had returned in the form of the so-called Virgin Avengers. I understand, Quentin, but whatever it takes, I will get that wish and save our city, Narasa said with cold determination. Copy that. Let's get settled in at our inn and then take survey of this place. Knowing our foes is important, but it'll be good to have a handle on where we'll be fighting as well, Quentin said. Narasa nodded. Smart thinking, Quentin. Narasa opened the door to her room at the Kit Inn lightly and closed it behind her as quietly as she could. As the door to the outside world at large closed, she felt the weight of everything roll over her in one massive wave. The aching in her body and the pounding in her head gave way to numbing fatigue. With the last bit of control she had in her exhausted body, she slowly placed the duffel bag on the ground next to the door before locking it. That locking, that symbolic last severance to the outside world, cut the frayed strings holding Narasa upright. Narasa's prosthetic arms detached, falling to the ground along with her coat with a loud clunk, as Narasa herself collapsed face first into the bed, having passed out before her head even hit the pillow. Meanwhile, Quentin was sitting on the couch. They had put their bags in their room, but found the room was a bit too stuffy for what they wanted to do. Quentin breathed in and out, slowly in time with the flow of the air from the window they had opened, and in their palm flickered a small mote of flame. The flame grew and shrank, matching their breathing, as Quentin sat with closed eyes, focusing as much as they could on the ember. Quentin then took a single breath in and held it, the flame expanding from just the middle of their hand to their whole palm. Quentin began to slowly release their breath, but the flame failed to match their breathing and went out all at once. Damn, said Quentin, their face scrunching up in frustration. Quentin stood up and paced back and forth before heading over to Narasa's door. They were about to knock with plans to ask Narasa if she wanted to join him in exploring the crossroads, but a soft purr of a snore from the other side of the door stopped them. Quentin gave a look of understanding to the door, as if their gaze could pierce through to the sleeping woman on the other side. They walked over to the table and carefully scribbled a note about wanting to reconnaissance the crossroads before grabbing one of the keys and exiting the room, closing the door softly behind them. Okay, and I'm finally done and can get some nice water.
Woo! Water! That was a fantastic round. I appreciate the lore.
I'm sorry, what was that?
He appreciates the lore.
The lore.
The lore. Hey, I'm sorry. The lore. I gotta say it right.
Yes.
It's not. Shut up. So, just saw the thing you posted in there. Yeah.
I would try to get some more done tonight myself, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to stay awake that long, unfortunately. But I am going to I have my schedule sort of set up for the next 2 days, so I have the list currently made for, yeah, it's about 10:30 for me. I have morning shifts. But,
get some rest.
Yeah. But I currently have a list made for the people who have requested it. So we'll be doing Prometheus, Cap, and Lord Plague tomorrow. If not the next day. All right. So I will see you all later. Thank you for joining, and I loved all of y'all's rounds. Good luck.